Cool Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yamin of Revolution. Trump set to make the biggest mistake in military history, the fall of the U.S. empire. Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Well, Trump must work for Putin because he absolutely is playing right into their hands and they can't wait for him till the shooting begin. Let's get right into the content. Salute. Russia and China. Put him up. Got him falling for a military.
Reports confirm that Iran and Russia just conducted joint naval drills on Thursday, with the aim of enhancing maritime security and countering shared threats, sending a clear signal about what is going on around Iran. Iranian media, Press TV, released an epic video during the joint exercise, organized by the 1st Naval District of the Iranian Navy, in the city of Bandar Abbas, and taking place in a wide area from the Sea of Oman to the northern Indian Ocean, said the spokesman for the Iran-Russia joint naval exercise, Rear Admiral Hassan Maksoudlu, quoted Fars news agency. Referring to the main focus of this exercise, the commandos were seen descending using ropes from helicopters, while speedboats maneuvered around them, to counter activities that threaten maritime security and safety, especially in protecting commercial ships and oil tankers, as well as fighting maritime terrorism, is a key aspect of this joint exercise. According to military experts, military maneuvers like this are more than just an exercise, it is a statement. These maneuvers show who controls key shipping lanes, who can project power, and who challenges U.S. influence in West Asia. To the layperson, this may seem far away, but these steps have far-reaching impacts on global energy markets, trade routes, and diplomatic calculations. Captain First Rank, Alexei Sergeyev, commander of the deployed Russian Naval Task Group, also expressed satisfaction with his presence in Bandar Abbas, and thanked the Islamic Republic of Iran for its hospitality. Emphasizing the friendly and close relations between the two sides, he said, the level of interaction and cooperation.
I'm telling y'all, when Russia do any naval drills, Russia is teaching Iran, teaching China, teaching South Africa, teaching these nations about naval warfare. They the big military dog on the block. They're preparing Iran for this grueling war that's finna take place. The no surrender, no retreat, not to be like Venezuela and capitulate. And this is something Venezuela couldn't do. They didn't have a navy to go challenge the U.S. at sea. You see? China have given Iran the satellite capabilities. I was reading an article on this. The satellite capabilities it's like shooting ducks in a pond. It's like shooting ducks in a bathtub. It's going to be so easy. And the world is waiting for Trump to make the move so that they can just get it over with. Because it's going to happen to them. The U.S. not prepared for what's going to happen because they have never in their life fought anybody capable of fighting back like this. Never have they. They just going off the bluster of we are America. That means nothing when it's time to die. You see the Russians, they had to lose hundreds of thousands of men in their Ukraine war. And they getting it on. The U.S. got to be prepared to lose hundreds of thousands of men to even be in this war. Guess who is ready to lose that? Iran.
Shows that we can work together to manage and resolve many maritime and coastal problems and challenges. Meanwhile, the American aircraft carrier USS Gerald Ford is heading directly to the coast of Israel. From there, the troops would either defend Israel or possibly head to the Gulf of Oman to take up positions.
They got to defend themselves.
In both cases, This was a clear message to America, one that needed no words.
Don't keep talking about attacking Iran and Russia and China keep showing up. Like, you gonna start shooting. Don't mind us because we here. We can shoot at Iran and we here. But Trump, he done put all of the U.S. military bluster on. He can't back down. The U.S. can't back down. So guess what? They got to take what's coming to them. You know, it's too late now. And when Iran shut down the Strait of Hormuz to do this, the U.S. told them they better not do this. That was an act of war. They did it anyway. They got Russia and China with them now. Iran feeling themselves. They ready to go. They ready for this thing, man. They tired of talking. The shooting gonna start this weekend, though, probably tomorrow or Saturday.
Contact Roberts Air for all your heating and cooling needs.
Tensions are reaching peak levels between Israel and Iran and the United States and Iran. The Iranians are publishing new footage of their anti-ship missiles that are hitting their targets very accurately. Iran is conducting drills in the Persian.
They warning the U.S., bro. They're trying to see. They're trying to. We can't hit those boats, bro. We got hypersonic missiles. We don't give a damn about what you're saying, your air defense systems you got for those ships. They definitely can hit those ships. Shame on the U.S. for threatening to nuke people if people fight back. That's disgusting. Ain't nobody scared of that. Dying is dying, bro. That's what the U.S. got to understand. You talking about you're going to kill them, whether you kill them with nukes or you kill them with regular weapons. You're talking about killing them. Well, they say other people going to die too if they got to die. That's a fact.
Gulf, alongside more participation coming now from the Russian naval forces who have indeed arrived to Iran to participate in these drills with Iran. What are the messages being sent here? Firstly, Iran is
the whole world been waiting for, and you better believe it's people in NATO. They want the U.S. to get their ass kicked because Trump embarrassed them. They want the U.S. to go get defeated and get their ass kicked. The small hats don't care. They're gonna make money regardless. They control the banks. They're gonna make money regardless how this turn out. Except Israel gonna get destroyed over there. The small hats don't give a damn about no Israel, nigga. They run the world. They got Britain. They got France. They talking about. They got Germany by the throat. Who gives a hell about that little piece of land over there they've been using to cause all this chaos? It's the U.S. that's gonna pay the price. You know, a military price. I feel bad for all those soldiers over there on those naval ships, Air Force fighters. They finna get a real war now. All that talking tough and picking on people, that shit out the window. Now you get a chance to really have you a war. It's staring you right in the face.
Showing very advanced and very accurate missile capabilities, whether it's land to sea, air to sea, sea to sea missiles against any potential targets that they might attack if an escalation happens between them and the United States of America. And they are sending multiple messages with the recent moves that they've conducted in the Hormuz Strait when they showed the numbers of tankers waiting because of this drill that Iran has been conducting. These are dozens of ships here and tankers waiting because of the Iranian drill. Iran
said so. That's why you got to wait. The U.S. can't help you. You think get the U.S. to escort you through that. Then, if they so tough, you don't want to wait. All tankers, get the U.S. to escort you through that. They go to the bottom of the sea. This is a flex your military muscle. You want to wait. You're just waiting hours now. If the U.S. play with you, you'll be waiting years to ever go through here again.
Basically, shutting the Hormuz Strait and telling everyone to wait while we finish our drill. In essence, sending a message to not only the United States, but to the whole world. You want to attack us? The Hormuz Strait will be shut to defend our country and to deter further aggression against our nation.
Nobody won't have
now, these messages are being heard and being seen in Washington, in Tel Aviv, and in any other relevant locations. That's why many countries are working around the clock to try and stop the American aggression or expected American aggression against Iran that Israel...
man. Listen, the dude who used to be formerly known as Prince Andrew was arrested today in Britain. We just got so much news. We don't have time to talk about the formerly known Prince arrested. He eating bread and water right now. He got fingerprinted earlier. Now, is that because they want justice for the Epstein victims? Or is that to warn Trump? Your ass will go to prison if you don't hurry up and attack Iran. That was a message to Trump and the rest of the U.S. elite. The small hats run everything. First, they starting over here in Britain. We don't got time. Time is running out. We just ruined the royal family. Trump, you next. You better attack. That's the exact message that was sent around the world. They don't ruin these elites if they don't hurry up and attack Iran, which is going to destroy the U.S., but the small hats don't care.
Would potentially be participating in. However, now, and following several weeks following the announcement that China and Russia will be participating in a drill jointly with Iran in the Persian Gulf, that they would be taking action in to prepare for any escalation. Russia indeed has arrived now, and it was welcomed by the Iranian forces.
Russia couldn't wait, nigga. You've been killing all those Russians and bragging about it in Ukraine. Lindsey Graham talking about the best money ever spent, killing those Russians. U.S. generals talking shit. Hundreds of thousands of Russians steady dying. And now you have chosen a battlefield to where the Russians can help kill you on GP, and you think they plan? Man, this is crazy.
In the Bandar Abbas port, Russia is sending another message alongside China with this participation in this naval drill with Iran. Iran had a very large ceremony to welcome the Russian.
I looked up the destroyer that the Chinese sent. It is the most deadliest destroyer on the face on the planet. The most deadliest surface ship in the world is the one the Chinese just sent over there. What messages they sending? That the gig got to stop. No more. No, they're not losing one more oil dealer. This is it. And they don't have to fight the U.S. The U.S. is dumb. Now China don't got to wait for you to come to fight in Taiwan. They can finish your ass off in Iran. That's what they finna do. That's
Russian warships participating, and Russia is also showing that, well, regardless of the fact that we are engaged in a war with Ukraine and in effect NATO too in Europe, that's not going to stop us from making sure that the United States doesn't feel like it has a free hand against Iran. And with this drill, sending a message of potential direct participation physically with Iran, should the United States decide to go on an all-out war against the country.
Well, damn, if you start shooting their direction, it's in the Iranian waters, China, Russian warships. If you start shooting towards Iran, you think Russia and China are not going to shoot back? They don't know what you're trying to shoot at. They don't know if you're shooting towards them. They just know you are an enemy threat. That's a fact, bro. That's a fact. The same thing the U.S. was doing. Hey, they in the Ukrainian waters. Russia get to shoot toward them. The U.S. will shoot back. This is how it go. They over there running a naval drill. Trump like, hey, when the drill gonna end? Never. It's a forever drill. Just you start shooting so they can deal with you.
Oh, this move that's coming from Russia has very deep and strong meanings and warnings to the United States and to the whole world. That unlike during the 12-day war, when Russia was sending all of these shipments to Iran, air defense systems to bolster their defense capabilities and attack capabilities, they are there with them present at the peak time of tensions between them and the United States of America, and when Israel is saying that an attack is imminent.
That's and because some of those advanced weapon systems the Iranians can't use. Just the same way the U.S. was sending advanced weapon systems to Ukraine, and we said the Russians told, hey, the Ukrainians don't know how to use that, and the U.S. said, so what? It really was NATO using it. The same thing, Chinese sending advanced weapon systems. Iran don't know how to use those. Those not going to be Iranians using them. It's going to be Chinese people. Some of those weapons, that's not going to be Iranians using them. It's going to be Russians using them. The same thing NATO did in Ukraine. They finna get a taste of their own medicine in Iran. It's supposed to happen in Venezuela, but Venezuela stood down. Now it's going to happen in Iran. It's definitely going to happen in Iran. If the U.S. decide to make the mistake, they finna get their ass toe off the bone.
It could last for weeks. Both China and Russia are taking a proactive measure now towards Iran in front of this American aggression against the country and potential threat for an all-out war. And the reason they're doing that is very simple. From a Russian perspective, Iran is a huge partner, a trade partner, an economic partner on very many levels. They have a strategic cooperation agreement. Iran has been supporting them with drones, with weapons, and Russia has been supporting Iran too with many of its systems that it needs and used to thwart certain actions coming from Israel and the United States that prove their effectiveness, whether it's to do with electronic warfare and with air defense systems, missile technology, everything, despite the fact that Iran has a huge, long list of missiles and military equipment they produce internally in Iran. The Iranian military industry is very solid and is very advanced at many levels, and it relies on Iranian knowledge and Iranian expertise to do all of this. But from a Russian perspective, they want to make sure that Iran has the edge to try and prevent and deter this attack. Now, China as well sent warships, and they said that they will be participating in this drill. As a matter of fact, there were reports of 2 warships coming from China just over a week ago, with potentially more expected to come. Now, when Iran is doing this drill and in effect shutting the Hormuz Strait in front of
Hungry Root makes sticking to my anti-inflammatory diet so easy. I just started an anti-inflammatory diet, and at first
the United States aircraft carrier and destroyers in the region, not very far from Iran. That is showing that there's a potential here of a confrontation with global powers over the region should the United States carry out this attack. And again, unlike the 12-day war, this time the chances of a direct confrontation emerging out of this hostility and terrorism coming from the United States and Israel is greater than the potential that we had back in June 2025 during the 12-day war.
Donald Trump has sent very big, very loud signals on Iran while keeping the talks going, apparently. These two things don't sit together very well unless the threat is the whole point. The second round of indirect talks in Geneva has just ended. Iran's side has described it as more serious than the first round, and they're talking about guiding principles and drafting progressive stuff or hopeful stuff. But at the same time, Trump's been pushing more military weight into the region, hasn't he? And Israel's own leadership has been told to prepare for a war scenario, now 90% likely to occur, according to Axios. So Ali Khamenei has gone on record with the bluntest version of what Iran is saying back. You can bring your carriers, but we've got weapons that can sink them. And he's framed it as a warning, not as a plea. He's framed that the American strongest army boasting is exactly the sort of arrogance that produces a surprise that they can't walk off, they can't walk away from, that even the strongest armies can get hurt. Once the other side answers your threats with a specific consequence like that, that's going to be one of their earliest targets, is how it's certainly reads to me. It stops being performance and starts being a bill that you might have to pay. Abbas Araghchi, Iran's foreign minister, has described the Geneva talks as more constructive than the earlier round and said there's a general understanding on guiding principles, but he's also been very careful to say it's early days. The hard part's still to come when it comes to putting anything into text. The real fight isn't the atmosphere in the room, it's what Iran would actually accept on uranium enrichment, what the United States would actually trade on sanctions relief, whether Washington is trying to drag missiles and regional alliances into a nuclear negotiation until deal just basically means surrender. Steve Witkoff, Donald Trump's special envoy leading the US delegation, is doing it in a format that shows how little trust exists, because the talks are still indirect, still being mediated by a man. Nobody sat there smiling at each other across the table. Notes are being carried back and forth like both sides are building a paper trail as much as they're building an agreement. And that lack of trust isn't a mood here, it's a memory, because Trump already walked away from that 2015 nuclear deal that was in place with Iran once. Now look at what the United States is demanding. Now he's back in power again. The American side's been pushing for Iran to abandon enrichment on its own territory, to dismantle or destroy infrastructure, to remove stockpiles, to accept limits that go beyond the narrow nuclear file into missiles and regional alliances. Iran's side has signaled a willingness to talk about limits and verification and dilution, perhaps even suspending uranium enrichment for a period of time, but not cancelling it. But it's also drawn a hard line over its missile program, because that's not on the table. And its regional relationships in other states are not a bargaining chip either. So that's Iran refusing to sign away its deterrent while America carrier troops and groups sit offshore. Trump's problem is that he wants zero enrichment, because that sounds very good, doesn't it? Sounds like a victory, sounds like a win. Sells as dominance, makes him look like a tough guy, makes him look like a winner. But zero enrichment's not a negotiation position. It's an end state. If you demand the end state up front, the only thing left to do is issue an ultimatum and then pretend you tried diplomacy. Israel's postures tightened around that same sequence of events. Benjamin Netanyahu has reportedly instructed Israel's Home Front Command and rescue agencies to prepare for a potential war with Iran, and Israeli media has described a state of maximum alert across security agencies. That's the behavior of a government that is treating the talks as a short runway to an escalation already being planned for. Israeli reporting has also described assessments that the likelihood of an American attack has risen after those Geneva talks now, with the core sticking point being the American demand that Iran abandon its enrichment on Iranian soil. But if your red line is a demand the other side has already told you is non-negotiable, then you're hardly building bridges here, are you? You're just building a cliff edge and marching everybody towards it. But when the diplomats talk, or try to talk hardball, and anyway, the hard objects are on the move. The USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group very much has already arrived in the region. It's now been joined by the USS Gerald R. Ford Strike Group, having been discussed as moving towards the region as well in the last week. Missile defense systems have been reinforced at American bases, feared to be targets now. Iran has named them as potential targets too, should they be struck, because they're not going to be the ones who fire first. Additional aircraft have been moving through European and regional hubs as well. Iran has matched that posture in its own right too. Of course, they're going to prepare for it, aren't they? The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has been operating around the Strait of Hormuz, and Iran has been running drills and signal that can impose friction on the most important maritime choke point on the planet. 60% of all global oil travels through that Hormuz Strait, of course, that they control. And it's a reminder that if you treat Iran as a target you can bomb without consequences, you're lying to yourself and you're lying to your public. Russia and China have been joining Iran for naval drills this week in and around the Strait of Hormuz as just an added layer of optics as well as constraint. Not a magic shield. Nobody's saying should ever sell that as one, but even the act of staging war games together changes the political atmosphere a bit, because it tells Washington that escalation doesn't just happen where only American choices matter. So what is the actual story here then, underneath all of this noise about there being a 90% chance of all-out war, amidst all these talks that are going on, as well as all the doom forecasting that's apparently coming with it in the media now as well? Well, the story is that the talks have progressed just enough to make it, well, a little bit awkward to pretend there was never a diplomatic path. Because clearly there is, and still continues to be. And the military build-up has progressed far enough to make it dangerous to pretend that this is just background as well. If Trump backs down, he looks like he threatened and then blinked. If he strikes, he has to own the consequences of turning a negotiation into an ultimatum with missiles behind it. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei's warning is not the thing that makes war likely here, no matter how the media might try and frame it that way, of course. Trump's posture is the thing that makes that war likely. Khamenei is answering a deployment with a deterrent statement, and you could dislike his tone, but you can't pretend the sequence is the other way around here. The American ships do not appear because Iran threatened them. Iran threatens to sink them because they are there. J.D. Vance has tried to describe the talks as productive in some ways, while also stressing that Trump has set red lines Iran is not yet accepting. Well, that's pre-authorization language, isn't it? That's the phrasebook of an administration that wants the option of escalation without the political cost of admitting it was always the option. Abbas Araghchi has spoken after those talks with Rafael Grossi, the head of the UN nuclear watchdog, and Grossi has given a positive read on the outcome of that and offered technical support, which is certainly progressive given the very public fallout between Iran and the IAEA last year. That's the sort of thing that should be lowering the temperature if the United States is genuinely aiming for an agreement, isn't it? Because is what a real nuclear deal is made of, isn't it? Inspections and verification steps and sequencing and the practical machinery that proves what is happening on the ground. But it only works if Washington is prepared to trade sanctions relief for limits that can be checked, rather than treating a deal as Iran dismantling its entire program to show obedience to them. So Trump's threats are blowing up in his face because the bluff has been answered with specifics. Once you send carriers, you put American prestige in the water. Once you say, we'll need it if we don't make a deal, you've told your own public that the ships are not there for defense. They're there as the muscle behind your ultimatum. And once the other side says plainly that the carriers can be sunk, the beautiful armada stops sounding like a flex and starts sounding like an invitation to disaster. What becomes unavoidable now is that any strike, even a limited one, will become a regional event by default. And we're also being told that this time it'll be a lot bigger than last time. So that might be a moot point. Iran has vowed it would strike Israel and American bases if the United States bombs. Israel is preparing its own posture and warning its own public. American bases across the region are reinforcing missile defense for a reason. It's not a contained scenario you can sell as a clean surgical action anymore, is it? What becomes irreversible is the collapse of the fiction that this is about non-proliferation in the narrow sense. If the demand is no enrichment on your soil, and the threat is carriers and strikes, the message is not we want safeguards, the message is we want control. And once that's the message, loud and clear, the long-term consequence is that every state watching learns the same lesson. That agreements can be torn up, that compliance can be treated as weakness, and that deterrence is the only language that ends up being respected. And what becomes indefensible is the attempt to blame Iran for the edge you've walked everyone onto. If the talks are continuing, if the drafting phase is being discussed, if technical frameworks are being talked through, then the claim that war is the only option is a choice and not a necessity. Trump can still choose sanctions relief for verifiable limits, but he can't choose those things while also demanding surrender terms and pushing carriers forward as if war is the prize. The basic power move here, very simple. Trump's trying to use military pressure to force Iran into accepting his red lines that Iran has already said it won't accept, can't accept. Israel's trying to keep the pressure high and the timeline short. Iran's trying to keep the file limited to nuclear and sanctions because widening that file is how you turn negotiations into a trap. None of this makes Trump look strong, though, does it? It makes him look like a man who confuses threat with control, who's about to learn the difference in the one place you cannot learn it safely, the Persian Gulf. Strait of Hormuz, all those US air bases and cities that sit inside missile range. Abbas Araghchi has put it on record that the Geneva round produced a general understanding on guiding principles. That sounds positive. That sounds good. That's welcoming, isn't it? But then J.D. Vance goes on to frame the same moment as productive in some ways, while still dangling Donald Trump's red lines like a trigger he can pull whenever he feels like it. The sort of language that lets Washington say, we tried, even if trying meant setting conditions no other state would accept. Donald Trump has also decided to stage his pressure in the dumbest possible place because he's moving serious naval power into a theater where Iran can't pretend it doesn't notice and where everyone else can't pretend they aren't watching either. Once you do that, you're no longer threatening Iran. You're threatening your own credibility. You're threatening the stability of the entire Middle East because if you don't use the assets you've moved, you've shown the whole world that theatrics were always the only point of them. Steve Witkoff is sitting in the middle of that as the named envoy, and the format itself is telling you how fragile all that is, because if the only way these two sides can talk is by having a man's foreign minister, Badr al-Busaidi, walk paper between rooms, you're not looking at trust at all. You're looking at a controlled burn. Rafael Grossi has then been brought into the picture as the technical hinge, because this is the point where politics stops being speeches and becomes inspectors and sequencing and what gets verified. And the moment verification is on the table, you've already moved beyond the fantasy that this is solved by shouting zero enrichment at Iran until it gives up. Iran has also had the sense to put compromised material into circulation that sounds like a deal you could actually operationalize, with reports describing proposals like suspending enrichment for a limited number of years, diluting stockpiles under inspection, even floating the idea of a regional consortium for civilian-grade activity. And those ideas do two things at once. They make it harder to pretend that Iran has offered nothing, and they make it harder for Trump to pretend he had to bomb because diplomacy was impossible. Benjamin Netanyahu, meanwhile, is acting like a man who wants the decision taken out of his hands and placed into Trump's, because Israeli reporting and Israeli political briefings are being used to build the atmosphere of imminence. And the point of that atmosphere is not simply military readiness, it's narrative readiness, the public conditioning that turns a choice into an inevitable event, even though he's the one that's been whispering in Trump's ears in Florida in recent weeks. Israeli outlets have also been churning out the same core claim from slightly different angles, that the gaps remain significant, that the key sticking point is enrichment on Iranian soil, and that timeframes are shrinking from weeks to days, and whether or not those anonymous briefings are accurate, the function is still obvious, or should be. It positions any strike as the natural consequence of Iranian refusal rather than an American decision. Amos Yadlin, a former head of Israel's military intelligence, has been used in the coverage as a sort of a big-name voice here, saying the region is much closer to an attack now. And lines like that aren't tossed out casually because they change how people behave in real life. Insurers start pricing in risk. Airlines rethink their routes. Shippers adjust their schedules. Suddenly the mood shifts from this might happen to everyone is acting like it's about to happen. And that manufactured imminence becomes pressure in its own right. Israel's home front command has then been pulled into the storyline by reports that Netanyahu has instructed preparations for potential war. And that's not just a bureaucratic detail either, because the moment civil defense posture is being discussed publicly, you're not talking about a pinprick strike fantasy, are you? You're talking about the expectation of real retaliation and the expectation of significant civilian disruption. But Iran has responded the way a state responds when it thinks the other side wants leverage more than agreement, by demonstrating that the Strait of Hormuz is not a background map feature, but a controllable space, something they can control very, very easily, by doing their drills, by signaling their readiness, by reminding everyone that escalation in this area doesn't say politely local. And Russia and China joining them for that Maritime Security Belt 2026 drill, as it's being called, then widens the problem still for Washington, because it complicates this neat little story of an isolated Iran being disciplined by an international community. They are not isolated. And it puts extra eyes and extra interest into the same waters Trump's trying to dominate with what he likes to call beautiful armadas. Nikolai Patrushev, a senior Russian official, has framed those exercises as a response to what he calls Western gunboat diplomacy. And that phrase seems pretty accurate to me. That phrase lands because it describes the tactics without the polite packaging, moving warships around to bully others. And once that description starts sticking, Trump's posture loses all of its favorite disguise, if you like, where threats get renamed as deterrence and escalation gets sold as strength. Barak Ravid's reporting at Axios has also added an explicit piece of framing that you can't ignore here either. The piece that has stoked the flames, really. The two aircraft carriers and hundreds of aircraft sitting in a theater creating the logic of Chekhov's gun. And the longer they sit there, the more Trump's own posturing turns into a trap, because the audience he's performing for includes his own supporters, Israeli war hawks, Gulf partners, and every rival power watching for whether American threats still cash out. And that's why this headline of 90% chance of kinetic action line that's being reported matters, even if it is only attributed to unnamed advisors. Because it's the leak you use when you want your own president to feel watched by his own pressure campaign. The kind of whisper that tells him backing down equals humiliation and pressing forward equals strength. Donald Trump has therefore built a situation where his war talk is doing the opposite of what it's supposed to do, because it's removing space for compromise. It's narrowing what his own negotiators can actually accept without looking like they've caved. And it's giving Iran every incentive going to treat the talks as a holding action while preparing for the moment he decides he finally needs a spectacle. Ali Khamenei's carrier line, the ships in the Gulf, the shuttle diplomacy in Geneva, Netanyahu's public readiness posture, the wider naval drills in the Hormuz Strait, all lock the same condition into place. Trump can either accept that diplomacy requires giving the other side something real, or he can choose to bomb and then pretend the retaliation is a surprise. And the part that has already blown up in his face is that he's moved enough hardware and talked enough nonsense that he's made backing down look like a defeat, even when backing down is the only sane option left. For more on the Iranian side of this story, including news that their nuclear facilities that Trump claimed he'd obliterated might actually be more functional than they'd like, check out this story here.
And completely lost to religion? It is, of course. As the Muslim feast and famine of Ramadan begins, an absolute devastation is about to be visited right in the heart of the Middle East, starting in the Persian Gulf, but very quickly spreading to the Levant and to the surrounding Arab states in the Persian Gulf. I have, from the highest placed of sources, that Israel and the United States have decided on all-out war on Iran in the next hours, at most in the next days. My source, impeccable, unimpeachable, tells me that they promise shock and awe, going back to the shock and awe that was launched around about this time in 2003, and which led to the cascade of ISIS and Al-Qaeda around the world, and led to the deaths of 1 million people in Iraq, thousands of service personnel of the American, British, and other allied armies. A war which was over quickly, but the end was actually merely the beginning, and a war that rages still. Learning nothing, forgetting nothing, the Trump regime has decided, like the Bourbons before them, that if it doesn't work the first several times, why not try it again? Donald Trump is about to open the gates of hell. And moreover, when the Russian Navy is in the Straits of Hormuz performing naval exercises with the Iranian Navy, this will be a war without end. This will be a war without limits. This will be a war without territorial boundaries. This will be a war that will spread like wildfire right across the region and right across the world. Donald Trump has assembled more than 1/3 of all American armed forces in or heading rapidly towards the Persian Gulf. In a U-turn after a U-turn after a U-turn, Trump has just lashed the British Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, for his decision to lease Diego Garcia and give title to the people who rightly own it. He once opposed it, then supported it, then opposed it again, and then supported it again. And now, this evening, where else but on social media, Trump has declared that he will be using not just Diego Garcia, but the Royal Air Force Base at Fairford in England, in the United Kingdom, for an all-out war, placing Britain, of course, in both circumstances in the firing line. The Iranians have missiles that can reach the United States of America. They definitely have missiles that can reach Westminster. The consequences of this war have been much warned against. Even by the neighbors, satraps as they are, have told Trump that this can only bring ruin upon them. and their regimes are beginning now to rattle down. The leader of the United Arab Emirates, Mohammed bin Zayed, wear his father's watch always. Mohammed bin Zayed is in the middle of a power struggle that has seen him disappear from view, and rumors of his death circulating in the region and farther beyond. The Persian Gulf family dictatorships will no longer exist once Iran begins its retaliation. In fact, I'll be asking our guests this evening about whether or not the Iranians should not get their retaliation in first. After all, a clear and present threat exists to their entire being, to their existential existence. An entire naval and air armada has been assembled, is sailing towards them. The president is daily, even hourly, threatening with them on social media. He's threatening to obliterate them. He's threatening to destroy them. And nobody could argue that Iran does not have the legal right to fire first. And those aircraft carriers in the Persian Gulf will quickly turn into floating coffins. What about the Russian Navy? What are the Russians going to do? What are the Chinese going to do? Iran is a centrally placed ally of both of them. Iran is the major supplier of oil to China, which has already lost its ally in Venezuela. And don't tell me that the Delcy Rodriguez has not sold the pass, because everything makes clear that she has indeed done so. So is China going to watch another ally of its being destroyed by Donald Trump? Is Russia going to allow the United States Army and Navy and Air Force to create a hostile regime right in the heart of the Russian heartland? This and these are big questions, and we are perfectly placed with our guests tonight to analyze them at the highest level. The guests we have, one Iranian-born Swedish and American citizen, and one a veteran of the CIA. Now,
switch to TurboTax.
if you think I'm bluffing, I promise you that I am not. I know this war has been a long time coming, and we have covered it coming for not months, but years. But this time, it's real. Shock and awe. Well, how did it work out the last time? It's more or less the anniversary of the war that Bush and Blair launched on Iraq in 2003. They killed 1 million people. Iraq has effectively ceased to exist as a functioning state ever since. ISIS and Al-Qaeda were born there. They proliferated and spread throughout the world. And the conflict is not over yet. The United States has just promised sanctions on Iraq. Sanctions on the Iraq they created, if they have the temerity to allow the man that won the election in Iraq to become prime minister again. Al-Maliki is not a trusted ally of the United States. That's why he won the election. The people of Iraq hate the United States. But then, at this point, who doesn't? Donald Trump is dealing death and devastation, instability and chaos all over the world, even inside the European Union, even inside NATO, even inside Washington, even inside his own cabinet, where it is widely believed that the Vice President, J.D. Vance, completely opposes the war against Iran. He's causing devastation and chaos even in his own country. Multiple mass shootings, assassinations of politicians, actually or revealed as plots and conspiracies. When the murder by ICE of 2 white Americans took place in the last month, half of America cheered. When Charlie Kirk was brutally assassinated on camera, the other half of America cheered. America's on the brink of civil conflict with a minority supporting Donald Trump, but a fanatic and heavily armed minority. This chaos has been unleashed as the prospect of the final end of Western European-based hegemony in the world began to be obviously doomed. That's what Marco Rubio's speech to the Munich Security Conference was all about. If you haven't read it, I urge you to read it line by line. It was a declaration that Western civilization is dying, it's going down, and that the Western European and their North American kith and kin must unite to reverse the anti-colonial trend, to reverse the trend towards multipolar power in the world. And the Europeans cheered it. In fact, they gave it a standing ovation. So now the global South, Africa, Asia, Latin America, Eurasia, they all now know what the American empire plans. It plans a reconquest of the world before it is literally too late for them to mount such an expedition. And Iran is the second of Donald Trump's reconquests. For 100 years and more, the United States has bridled against the independence of Latin America, against the degeneration of the Monroe Doctrine. A Monroe Doctrine is now in place. No opposition to American domination will be permitted in the Western Hemisphere, and that includes from European countries. Denmark, as Senator Lindsey Graham said, who cares who owns Greenland? Well, only Greenland and Denmark, of course, because it's their sovereign territory. But who, as Lindsey Graham said, is Denmark? In fact, he said it with such profanity that it caused great offense even to American diplomats present. But he was telling the truth. Who is Denmark? Who is the Netherlands? Who is France? Who is Britain with their woke and weak armed forces? The United States knows full well that American security guarantees are the only thing that they could rely on. They tried to destroy Russia and failed. They tried to stop China's rise and rise, but they failed. And they're about to discover that Iran is not Venezuela. Iran is not Iraq. The United States does not have the military force to occupy Iran, a country of 90 million people and truly vast territory, with allies in Moscow and Beijing. And that's why they've chosen shock and awe.
Nathan Watkins doesn't believe in limits, especially limits on your property taxes. Watkins testified against Governor.
My source tells me that the United States and Israeli air power is going to devastate Iran for 48, 72 hours or more until they hope they have broken the regime and broken the spirit of the people. But they forgot that boomerangs come back to hit you. The Iranian armed forces are this time locked and loaded. The Iranian response is this time perfectly calibrated. And as Professor Marandi, our friend and frequent guest, just tweeted in the last few minutes, leave all Arab countries in the Persian Gulf immediately, full stop. That means that the Straits of Hormuz are going to be blocked, that the oil and gas production facilities in all of Iran's neighbors are going to be instantly destroyed. That means that American bases far away from the Persian Gulf are going to be annihilated, and anyone in them will be eviscerated. The armada of ships is highly vulnerable from land to ship missiles, hypersonic missiles, which will target the big warships, target the aircraft carriers. And then there's the question of Israel. This war is for Israel, just like the Iraq war was for Israel. Israel has now led the United States into another disaster. And they will pay a high price for it, because the Iranians, once they're finished with their Gulf neighbors, will ensure that the full might of their missile power will fall on the streets of Tel Aviv, of Ashkelon, of Haifa, of Jaffa. The Iranian response will be unlimited in time and space. It will stretch across the world, but it may destroy Israel first and foremost. Now, some of you say, my own son asked me if Iran could possibly win this confrontation. The answer is, it depends what you mean by winning. It is entirely underestimated in Western circles the nature of the Iranian political and religious system. For them, death is not the end. For them, death is a ticket to paradise. For them, death against America fighting Israel is a guaranteed ticket to paradise. For them, going down with all guns and all rockets blazing is an honor. To go down fighting Satan, the great Satan, and the little Satans is an honor for them. They will not care if they die. They will not care, because for them, death is not the end. For us in the West, flabby and completely lost to religion, it is, of course. We care only about material things. And therefore, I draw your attention to this. Once the Straits of Hormuz have been closed, once not a pint of oil or a meter of gas is being produced anywhere in the Persian Gulf, and any already produced will be precluded from leaving the Straits of Hormuz, you will not be able to buy oil and gas. Your homes will shiver. Your factories will grind to a halt. Your cars will be abandoned on the streets. Your aircraft will be unable to take off. Your economy will be devastated and ruined. Your unemployment, Britain's just reached 5% this week. It'll be 50% or more. So if you care about material things, then beware that what Donald Trump and Netanyahu, with the active participation of Keir Starmer, because Trump's just told us he's going to be using an English airfield to fly bombers to destroy Iran. Once the war begins, nothing that you hold dear will any longer be guaranteed, and much of what you value will disappear forever. And a new world will be born in flames and screams of agony in country after country. Apocalyptic for sure, but then the apocalypse begins any time now. in the United States of America. How could he not? He's a veteran of the CIA and the State Department's Office of Counterterrorism. And he's the founder of the influential Berg Associates. Larry, wonderful to see you again, even in such difficult
Hello, my friend.
Circumstances. A good friend of ours, mutual friend of ours, who's in a position to know these things even better than you and I, has assured me that the war is about to start. Is that your take on it also?
Yeah, I think that they're loading it up. The last sort of chess piece to move into place will be the Gerald R. Ford, the aircraft carrier. Once it arrives in the Med, that's about 3 days away. They anticipate Friday, Saturday. So I think the odds are very high that Trump is going to be pressured into launching this attack, and this will go down in history as one of the most foolish, reckless steps in world history, because I think it's going to end up doing significant damage, not just physical damage to the U.S. military capabilities in the region, but damage to the U.S. reputation. It's like, you have Muhammad Ali as this great fighter, and then once Muhammad Ali steps into a ring against somebody that he's expected to beat, and that fighter beats him, all of a sudden the reputation goes away, and that's what's facing the United States, because Russia and China have really made a point of joining forces in the wake of that failed color revolution that was launched on December 28th, with the United States taking the lead in an economic attack, an active war on Iran. On June 29th, Russia, China, and Iran signed a trilateral security agreement. And that wasn't just for show. That is an agreement with real teeth, and the Russians and Chinese have been acting on that agreement since the signing that took place late last month.
Trump's more primo carnera than Muhammad Ali, and only people of your age and mine will know that allusion. But you remember the film about primo carnera. The bigger they are, the harder they fall. And if the United States, you see, Iran doesn't have to win the war. It just has to survive the war and inflict serious material damage on the Trump presidency. And if I were a betting man, I'd put money on their ability to do that, Larry.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Look, there is a deal. If Trump was actually acting on his own, in possession of his faculties and pursuing his own agenda, I actually think he'd make the deal with Iran that's on the table. Iran is not building a nuclear weapon. They don't, at least under the Ayatollah, they don't want to build it. They see that as an act against God, that is a sin to do so. So they're willing to allow guarantees to be put in place that would ensure that they're not building a nuke, and to allow permanent on-site inspection of the enrichment facilities. So if the goal was just if they were serious about, we don't want Iran to get a nuke, then that deal's there to be available. But that's not what it's about. The United States persists in telling the big lie, a number of big lies. Number one, that Iran is the number one sponsor of terrorism in the world. It is absolutely, factually not true. I can prove it both through the publications from my old office at State, the patterns they put out, the patterns of global terrorism. That started in 1990, which reported on what had happened in 89. It had continued through 2003. Then they began calling it country reports on terrorism. The last one was issued last April in 2025 for the preceding year, 2024. And then there's a French think tank called Fondalab. And Fondalab also has done a study. And what does that study reveal? Since 1979, and let's put it in 1980, is 46 years, the number one groups responsible for 80+% of the terrorist attacks are the Sunnis that are sponsored by individuals and governments in the Gulf, the Saudis, the Qataris, the Emiratis. Not a single group in the top groups that have killed literally hundreds of thousands of people over the last 46 years. Not a single one of them is connected to or funded by Iran. Not one. And yet they go with this lie that Iran's the number one sponsor of terrorism. It is a flagrant lie.
Well, I mean, they even say Cuba is a sponsor of terrorism when Cuba, of course, is completely antithetical to terrorism. It's completely alien to their political ideology, but that's another matter. You seem to think that Trump, left to his own devices, might be favorable to a deal rather than what will turn out, I agree with you, to be one hell of a war, Larry. This is not Venezuela.
Yes.
This is not even Iraq 2003. This is the mother of all wars we're talking about, and fraught with terrifying dangers to all kinds of people, many of them close friends of the Trump family. But Trita Parsi, my earlier guest, he felt that Trump had taken charge of this file, that Trump was the one doing the charging towards war. And while he acknowledged that there were divisions in the administration, this time at least, Trump was up for the mother of all wars.
Yeah, well, no, he is up for it. Yeah, absolutely. You remember what happened when Israel launched its surprise attack on June 13th? Initially, Trump's attitude was, "Hi," he was Sergeant Schultz from Hogan's Heroes. "I know nothing. I see nothing. I hear I didn't know anything about this." And then 2 days later, he goes, "Oh, I knew about it all along. I was fully on top of it." He's going to say whatever needs to be said. The military momentum in this is more of the deep state, and I continue to insist that the deep state is driving a lot of this train, not Trump. And I use the example of when he hosted the quote peace talks between Armenia and Azerbaijan last summer in D.C. Because when I saw that, I was like, where did that come from? Because I guarantee you, if you would have told Trump to find Armenia and Azerbaijan on a map, he wouldn't have known which continent to look on. In fact, he still keeps calling it. He settled the war between Azerbaijan and Albania. And you're going, yeah, he's really on top of his geography game here. No, that was a CIA operation. And note that the CIA has an enormous presence in Armenia, a significant presence. So this is this goes into this broader plan to take out the Iranian Islamic Republic, not because it's the main source of terrorism. In fact, the real irony here is the Iranians with the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, the IRGC, they were in the forefront of fighting those radical Sunni Islamist groups, the ISIS in particular, Al Qaeda, Tahrir al-Sham, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, whose former leader is now president of Syria. Iran was fighting these Islamic groups who on paper were the ones responsible for killing Americans. And yet, what's America doing? We're funding the very ones we claim that they're killing us. And we're attacking the guys who were trying to fight them. We are in, George, my friend, we're in a crazy world.
Yeah, we are. And we've never had a crazier one. And you and I have lived through a lot of crazy people running things in the world. God knows if we'll survive it, Larry. But going back to the kinetics, if you like, you make the point that the latest aircraft carrier to join the group is about 3 days off the coast of Israel. It can either then park itself there and try to help the anti-missile operation, or it could sail further into the Gulf, which would knock D-Day forward a few days into the following week. But it will be by the weekend in the Mediterranean. and it will be off the coast of Israel. Is Israel ready to face the inevitable consequences of this?
No, they're not. And if one of the other false narratives that has been pushed by both Washington and Israel is that Iran barely laid a glove on them during the 12-day war. But, the actual evidence showed that there was a substantial and significant damage. And the Iranians basically pulled their punches even then. But now they've recognized that they are in an existential fight for survival. And they are approaching it that way. That's why they swallowed their pride and sought direct assistance from both Russia and China, which both are happy to provide. Right now, Russia, China, and Iran, along with India, are conducting joint naval exercises. Now, this has been an annual event, so this exercise is nothing that's just been ginned up in the last 2 weeks because of the rising tensions. It's been on the board, but it is being invested now by Russia and China with some additional participation, sending a message to the United States that Iran's not going to be in this alone. And then when you look at the array of firepower, what the United States can actually do, right now it's keeping its aircraft carrier that's in the Arabian Sea about 1,000 miles off the coast of Iran. Well, why is that relevant? Because the destroyers that are accompanying that aircraft carrier that are to provide the air defense screen, they also carry on board, there are three destroyers. Each one is carrying a load of about 56 Tomahawk cruise missiles. The only problem is the Tomahawk cruise missile can only fly 1,000 miles. So if you're 1,000 miles offshore and then you're firing a missile that can only go 1,000 miles, that means you're going to be blowing up a bunch of beachfront property, but not much else. So, and then it requires the U.S. to deliver missiles that are launched from aircraft. Well, the Chinese have now provided Iran with a three-dimensional radar system that has been fully integrated with Russia's air defense systems, S-300, S-400. And that radar system looks out about 300 miles from the border of Iran. So any stealth aircraft, and these are specifically designed to detect stealth aircraft. Any stealth aircraft, once they enter in that, is going to be detected and raises a significant odds that it'll be shot down. So the United States could be experiencing air losses like it has. The last time it experienced any significant air loss was in the campaign in Serbia, Yugoslavia, back in 1999.
Now, you know Russia very well. And so let me segue to that, Larry, because I'm keen to get your expert take on what might be good news. The talks in Geneva between Russia, the United States, and Ukraine, they didn't collapse. Nobody's trousers fell down. They appeared to be difficult, but professional. And one got the impression, even from initial reports, that some progress had been made. And then we learned today something which could be more significant, that just as he was leaving for the airport, the chief Russian negotiator was asked to come back and hold a 2-hour bilateral meeting, just the Russians and the Ukrainians. Whether the US gave permission for that, who knows? But a 2-hour meeting just between the two of them, that sounds like progress to me. What about you?
I'm not as confident. It depends on, was this Budanov or Umarov? Because Budanov has got his ties with the CIA. Umarov has got his ties with British MI6. And there's actually, I call it a sort of a proxy civil war underway right now between the Americans and the Brits. Because they're looking at the Ukraine conflict in two very diverse ways. The Russian position is not going to change. It is set in stone, which is the territories of Crimea, Zaporizhia, Kherson, Donetsk, Luhansk. Those are part now permanently of the Russian Federal Republic. They're not going to be returned to Ukraine in any form whatsoever. There's not going to be any concessions on that on those issues. The only thing on the table right now is whether Russia will continue to take territory, to take particularly Odessa, Nikolaev, Dnipropetrovsk, and Kharkiv as part of Novorossiya. Both Lavrov and Putin have spoken in recent months about Novorossiya this is part of Russia. So they're looking to negotiate basically a surrender of Ukraine. Zelensky is refusing to surrender, but Zelensky may not be in the same powerful position that he thinks he is. You've got Zaluzhny, who's been in the UK as Ukraine's ambassador to Her Majesty's Court, or His Majesty's Court now. So I view him as a tool of MI6. You got Budanov, who's sitting now as advisor to the president, former head of the intelligence outfit. He's been very close with the CIA. So really, the UK and the United States are going to ultimately decide how this gets settled. And I don't think really the Ukrainians are going to have much of a say in it.
Well, the other Europeans are definitely not, which makes it all the more surprising, their reaction to Rubio's speech by telecast at the Munich conference the other day. I got the feeling I had been, as George Bush would put it, misunderestimating Rubio. I think he's emerged as a powerful theoretician of empire, and he has a mission. And I would have thought Vance might be a bit nervous about that mission. And his mission is to relaunch the Western colonial empires, to halt the reversals of what he called communist-inspired colonial uprising. By definition, though he didn't name them, roll back the BRICS, roll back the SCO, reconquer, essentially, reconquer all the ground that has been lost since the Second World War. And the Europeans were up clapping it like seals, standing ovation. What was your reaction?
Same as yours. I thought, Yogi Berra, the old catcher of the New York Yankees, used to say, "This is deja vu all over again." I mean, they've learned nothing since the collapse of the Soviet Union, when the West was presented a golden opportunity to really create a new world order, a world order in which the interests of each country were promoted. We tried to build up, not tear down. We tried to collaborate with, not dominate. Instead, the United States chose the opposite. We saw the Russia economy as prostate, as prostrate on the ground, that we could take control of it. We could essentially rape it of its resources, dominate it, split it up. And then that damn Vladimir Putin comes along and disrupts that whole dream. And instead to go back to pitch this conflict where the United States, by being at the time in 2000, 2001, the dominant economic player in the world, instead of using that position again to build up others, we used it to bully and to threaten and to coerce. Well, you can only do that so long before you get the pushback, and that's where BRICS got its start in 2015, and then the development of BRICS, it's accelerated as a result of U.S. actions to punish all countries for not just not doing what the United States wants with respect to bilateral relations, but also punishing India for having diplomatic relations with Russia. And so the United States we're a psychopathic country, and that's why I suggest to my Russian friends, you don't negotiate with a serial killer. You put the serial killer down or in jail. And that's essentially what the United States is, in my view now. We've become the equivalent of a serial killer. We got 700 plus military bases, and we're getting ready to launch a military attack on the country of Iran, who has not attacked us by any stretch. They've not threatened us out of context. And instead, we are going to create a pretext that's going to send bombers in that's going to kill men, women, and children. And we don't give a damn. because they're not real people as far as we're concerned in the United States. They're just the cost of doing business.
You are not the problem. The problem is the stress loop he's stuck in. I blamed myself for months, thinking he...
And that, you know,
well, as
I am
Congressman Randy Fine put it, they're less than dogs. Muslims are less than dogs, according to a member of the U.S. Congress, Mr. Randy Fine, just the other day. Now, I'm in Moscow, Larry, and it's full of Americans. They're not going around with Stetsons and cowboy boots, but they're here. And it is reported, I think, in The Economist today, but citing Ukrainian intelligence, that Trump has lined up $400 billion worth of business for American companies and American interests here in Moscow. That's, if true, a very powerful reason for the U.S. to finish this thing. But as you put it earlier, Zelensky doesn't want to surrender. So you've got an irresistible force in Donald Trump, and you've got an immovable object in Zelensky. If Trump is really now inked, or at least penciled, a lifting of economic sanctions on Russia, and a huge bonanza of business waiting in the pipe, why doesn't he go all the way and pull the lever that gets rid of Zelensky?
Yeah, well, because Trump's not serious about it. You know, look, let's step back and look objectively at what's happened. And this is per Lavrov as well, so Foreign Minister Lavrov. The United States made some firm commitments to Russia at the Anchorage summit last August to Putin. The United States has not fulfilled any of those promises. The United States continues to impose sanctions on Russia and third parties that deal with Russia, number one. Number two, they haven't unfrozen the assets. Number three, they haven't returned the property that was illegally confiscated by Barack Obama in the United States in 2016, December of 2016. They haven't reestablished direct flights between the United States and Russia. You can't point to one single thing where Donald Trump has offered a gesture to say, "Hey, we're gonna remove these. Remember these people we had sanctions? We're removing those sanctions." They haven't done that. So you can't point to one thing that Donald Trump and his team have done other than continue to escalate. And they're saying, "Oh, well, we're going to give Zelensky until June." June? Give him till tomorrow at noon, because the United States can pull the plug that quick. But they don't want to, because we keep the ultimate goal here is not to have a peaceful relationship with Russia. The ultimate goal here is ultimately to destroy Russia, get control of Russian assets, break Russia up as a it's too damn big. And we want those rare earth minerals. We want the gold, we want the uranium, we want the oil. And the Russians shouldn't have it. That's the Western attitude.
Finally, Larry, if I may, and you've been very generous with your time. Keir Starmer is on the point of falling. He has a by-election coming up at the end of the month. He's virtually certain to lose it ignominiously. Then he's got local elections in May, which are going to be a landslide defeat. And at that point, a leadership challenge against him is virtually a certainty. So if the British are playing this pernicious role, which, I mean, even in Geneva, the British brothel creeper Powell was actually hanging around in the lounge of the hotel where the talks were taking place. He's the national security advisor of Keir Starmer. Who's driving this British determination to play such a dog in the manger role in relation to the Ukraine conflict? Britain's a country on its knees, breaking up, literally breaking up, and its economy going down the drain, unemployment rising. And why are the British so obsessing about keeping this war going?
I would look into the city of London and to the banks, because the hopes and dreams that were inherent in getting control of the resources in Ukraine were always there. Let's not forget, prior to the start of the special military operation, the number one country in the world in terms of natural resources, being able to be self-sufficient, was Russia. Number 5 was Ukraine. So a country that was that rich in resources was certainly being eyed by the West as a ripe target. Now, what the other thing to take into account is, although Ukraine was blessed with this vast abundance of resources, it was the poorest country in Europe. How could that be? Well, the reason for it, and we've seen parallels with what France did to the countries in the Sahel, to Mali, for example, and Niger, that when you've got a colonial interest, you are extracting from the country. You're not giving back. You're not doing what the Chinese do with the Belt Road Initiative, where you're building up infrastructure and you're equipping the people with education and trying to raise the standard of living. It's all about taking and absorbing for yourself without any regard for the locals. That's what's happened to Ukraine. Ukraine is just, it's something to be used. And without any regard for its people, without any regard for the welfare of the children. I mean, it's sick. But the UK is just living out its colonial legacy. I mean, frankly, that's how it's dealt with most of the world for the last 300 years, become a habit. And unfortunately, the United States has been imitating it. So we're both in the same boat.
Switch to TurboTax. File free in the app by 2/28.
True.
Buried in snow.
Wow. Well, I have
this photo.
I have a picture of Larry and me with them. That statue is about 10 feet tall. Wow.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yes.
Before we get to China and Russia and what they will probably tolerate and what they won't tolerate when Israel and the United States attack Iran, a couple of questions from your piece, Bavaria Rhapsody, Insecurity Conference Targets Recolonization of the Global South, at LouRockwell.com and JudgeSnap.com.
Thank you.
It's a great piece. Some of the lines in there are hilarious. I got to ask you about one or two. Is the rule-based international order now exposed as a sham?
Absolutely. And even before the admission by Mark Carney, and that continued to be the case in Munich. But then, of course, this was turned upside down by Marco Rubio's speech. And that was quite something, Judge. Can you imagine in 2026, 26 years at the start of the new millennium, and you have a U.S. Secretary of State going to Europe and basically telling the European Chihuahuas, look, now we are going to recolonize the Global South, and we ask you to come with us, because then you're going to recover all the glamour that you had before when you were the colonial power. Wow.
Basically, the United States of America, which Rubio described as a child of the Europeans, asking the Europeans whose colonies we helped to separate from them to allow us to colonize other countries. But you can't make this up.
No, you can't make this up. Well, first of all, Marco Rubio, I wonder what he studied in history when he was in high school. It's really pathetic. And but the call for recolonizing the global South, issued to the Europeans and describing the U.S. as part of the European civilization, starting with Greece and Athens. So, in fact, the U.S. There was never a 1776, right?
Wow. But and what was the reaction in the audience when Rubio talked about the glories of recolonization?
A standing ovation.
Wow.
I rest my case.
Nathan Watkins doesn't believe in limits, especially limits on your property taxes. Watkins testified against Governor Abbott's property tax caps, saying,
"Tax caps or revenue caps?"
Nathan Watkins, he's reckless and he'll leave you in his dust.
All right, you got to stop buying generic Viagra if y'all over 40. You can get 9 pills of 100 milligram generic Viagra for just $7 with free.
Wow. So we really, well, what was the reaction when Rubio talked about the glories of Christianity? They probably sat on their hands.
Absolutely. And of course, nobody would make a connection to the glories of Christianity now in Syria and Palestine. That's not exactly glorious at the moment, is it?
No, not at all. And he didn't say anything about the Israelis killing Christians in Palestine or Lebanon.
Exactly. And before, American ISIS creatures killing Christians in Syria, including the throat slitter now posing as president of Syria. This is one of the things that he did when he was one of the leaders of Idlibistan in northern Syria.
Wow. Well, you did use a couple of hilarious one-liners. You referred to a human being in your piece as the ghastly Estonian with the IQ of a dismembered worm.
Very important, Judge. No offense to worms.
Right. I think I know who she is, but you can tell us why you called her that.
Well, we just need to look at her face. And it's absolutely crazy because average European citizens, I heard this in Italy a lot, and I even heard this in France. And, you know, the average guy in a cafe on a bar is about, just look at her face and you can see that she's a bloody idiot. The problem is she represents us, 450 million plus.
You're talking about Kaja Kallas, who's the Commissioner of Foreign Affairs. I don't know what her title is.
She's called officially, Judge. She's called Higher Representative of the European Commission for Foreign Policy. One of those typical Brussels titles.
Right. Now, a friend of mine, I don't want to tell you who he is, but he's a well-known professor of political philosophy at one of the oldest universities in Europe, was a grad student with her. And has repeatedly referred to her as the stupidest person in the class.
But that's it's even better because he met her personally, and he saw how she was the typical idiot in the room when we're growing up.
What did Gilbert Doctorow told me that she would make Lindsey Graham look like Tucker Carlson. Now that is quite an extraordinary leap. What did she do or say that is so offensive to rational thinking?
Well, the only thing she says, Judge, and it's her motto, it's anything Russophobic. I don't remember her saying anything about, for instance, EU policy vis-a-vis Africa or Latin America. Not to mention the other parts of Europe. It's only Russia. She never says anything about China because she doesn't even know what's going on in China. It's extremely embarrassing. And the kind of discussion that, it's normal in Europe always comes back to the point of the degradation of educational standards all across the EU. And obviously in Estonia was never a bastion of great universities, right? So this is, and they pick these people, very carefully to positions of power because they know that they are useful idiots. They can groom them since they are still in finishing their undergraduate courses. And that explains why all these people who are in the European Commission in the position of commissioners, I think there are 27 different commissioners in different parts of the EU. They're all the same. Probably the only one who had an intellect above room temperature in the past 25 years or so was Pascal Lamy. That's the only one we can remember. Everybody else were bloody idiots, essentially.
The Russian, U.S., Ukrainian kabuki dance, the negotiations in Geneva, even though they had added to them two very senior Russians.
Medinsky was back.
Yes, Vladimir Medinsky, you know who that is. He's the right-hand thinker to President Putin, and Deputy Foreign Minister Mikhail Galuzhin. Even though they were added, the negotiations in Geneva lasted for 2 hours on Tuesday, and that's it.
So this means there was, and Medinsky, he's a cool, calm, composed guy. He's a historian. He's very, very serious. And what he said is, yes, we're making progress, which is code for nothing happened. and nothing did. I asked this question today, and this afternoon, Judge, was crazy. I did 7 podcasts in a row. I don't think you ever did 7 podcasts in a row in a matter of a few hours. Well,
you have to ask Chris. We might have done 8 one day, but that's exhausting.
It is. So I was asking my interlocutors, can you describe to me the feeling of having a professional historian and a super qualified diplomat in front of Budanov, who is basically a war criminal sitting across the table? There's nothing to negotiate. And when I interviewed a commander, Apti Alaudinov, this guy is the guy who did absolutely everything in the special military operation. He's a lieutenant general. Putin respects him immensely. And he said, no, you cannot even talk to these people. And he knows these SBU guys and special forces guys personally, the Ukrainians. So there's nothing to discuss.
Do the Russians have any respect for the 2 American real estate agents that Trump has sent to negotiate?
That's a very, very long story. In fact, there's a joke going around in Moscow, Judge, that you have 3 American real estate developers who want to come up with a plan to solve the war in Ukraine. Trump, Kushner, and Witkoff.
Wow. Where are the negotiations going to go? Nowhere.
Nowhere. At the moment, absolutely nowhere. There is something that is extremely important, and I was trying to talk about it with my 7, in fact, almost 8 interlocutors today. There is apparently a 2-track process going on, which is the famous Kirill Dmitriev plan, which was leaked to American mainstream media. We still don't know if this was leaked by the Witkoff people or by the Dmitriev people, but it was leaked anyway, with 7 points, which are completely absurd. And this, and you talk to people here at the level of Minister of Foreign Relations or military level, SMO, or some of the best think tanks, and they say, but this is completely absurd. Do they expect Putin to actually follow any of these 7 points? And one of them, which has been recycled via Western mainstream media and via some media here in Russia, which is even more worrying, is that Putin would be willing to do anything so Trump could lift sanctions against Russia, including vast US investments in the Russian economy. This is beyond bullshit. And everybody confirmed that to me. This is beyond bullshit, and this is essentially spin by Reuters, AP, Wall Street Journal, CNN, etc.
Right, right. Colonel McGregor.
Radical Islam is taking root in Texas, and do-nothing politician Terry Leo Wilson bent to their will, even voting to celebrate it. America First
Called to my attention this morning reports out of France that U.S. fighter pilots in U.S. jets are patrolling the skies of Kyiv and there to shoot down Russian drones. Do you know anything about this?
No, I don't. It's the first time that I could try to talk to people in France about that. And the Russians, obviously, they don't talk about what the Europeans are doing. They prefer to act. If that is,
if this is reported in a reputable place in France, which Colonel McGregor says it is, then surely the Russians know about it. So the Russians are negotiating with the Ukrainians. The head Ukrainian negotiator assassinated a Russian general and attempted to assassinate another. And the two mediators come from a country that is going to shoot down their own military equipment. Where are we going to go with this?
But and now it's I would say it's beyond tragicomic. It is a tragedy for Ukrainian people. Comic because we have this criminal elements posing as normal citizens or normal negotiators for that matter. But it is tragic. The overall picture is tragicomic and, of course, extremely sad because the whole thing is collapsing around Ukraine. And Alaudinov, in our interview, it was extraordinary because he started in the middle of the interview to get into an analysis which was basically the philosophy of war. He is a guy who the first thing that he says, if any war should not be fought by definition. But if you fight it, you have to go all the way, which is exactly what he did in his personal experience in Ukraine. But here, yes, please, go ahead.
Let me jump to Iran. If Israel and the United States attack, and I guess that should be when. I mean, Trump has amassed such an enormous amount of assets there, but when the U.S. attacks, what will Russia do?
What they are already doing and not advertising. This is the Russian modus operandi, Judge, and the Chinese as well. And Gurulev, I did an interview with Gurulev, which is arguably the best Russian military specialist nowadays. And he said, no, we never tell anybody what we're doing. Of course, we have our protocols, part of our strategic partnership with Iran. And then I pressed him a little bit more, saying, look, Iranian delegations, when they come to Moscow, they always say, look, anything we ask, they deliver, and vice versa. And he said, yes, basically that's the case. They never asked us for something really. They did ask us in terms of protecting their grid, because they had their grid broken at the start of the 12-day war. This is something that's not going to happen again. And now their grid is supervised by the Chinese. It's integrated with satellite Beidou, the Beidou system, and satellite Chinese satellite Beidou. And the Russians are helping in their counter-intel sphere as well. So silently, the Russians and the Chinese, everything that Iran needs to at least, I wouldn't say block, but at least refrain the Americans from doing more damage than they would in normal attacking conditions. They have it in place. And they are self-confident, which they were not after the 12-day war, especially.
What about oil? The Chinese receive 1.4 million barrels of Iranian oil a day. How are they going to get the oil out there? We are hearing some reports that China will escort the tankers out and held to pay if the Americans interfere with those escorts.
Absolutely. This would be the direct Chinese response and very graphic. Look, we have the Chinese, the PLA Navy escorting our tankers. Are you going to attack us? Then you have to suffer the consequences. The other possibility is that assuming this would be, and I was discussing this with Larry today, Judge, a few hours ago. If this is a 2-week war maximum, because the US does not have what it takes to go for a long attack against Iran, they could do it maybe for 2 weeks. That's it. So the Chinese could refrain to do anything during 2 weeks because they have enough reserves. And the Iranians in this, I'm talking about a very optimistic scenario. The Iranians wouldn't have to block the Strait of Hormuz, because then they will also lose a lot, because their oil goes through Hormuz as well. So there's no necessity to block launch a lot of sea mines everywhere. It would take months to demine these sea mines, blocking the navigation in the Strait of Hormuz. But if the Americans would launch a hardcore shock and awe attack, there's no question that the first thing the Iranians would do would be to block the straits. And they already gained blocking the Strait of Hormuz, different ways.
And if they block the Straits of Hormuz, Jeff Sachs says the price of gasoline at the pump in the U.S. will go up to $10 a gallon.
At least.
That would be disastrous for Trump politically.
Completely. And not to mention that Trump would be responsible for collapsing the global economy, Judge. We discussed that in previous shows. The famous Goldman Sachs pile of derivatives explosion, which is in the quadrillions of dollars. That's it. You can explode the global economy in less than 2 weeks.
Do you see President Xi Jinping or President Putin picking up the phone and saying, Donald, don't do this?
As a father of 2 daughters, I know how important it is to protect our loved ones. But liberals are releasing hundreds of violent criminals back on our streets with revolving door bail. That's why I'm building a new jail that doubles our capacity for violent criminals. I've experienced violent threats serving overseas.
Texas families shouldn't face them on our streets.
No parent should lie awake wondering if a criminal let out on bond is coming back.
I'm Nathan Watkins, and I approve this message.
Vote Nathan Watkins, the true conservative.
We have no evidence that this might happen, Judge, because there is a very perverse element into this whole equation. Never interrupt your enemy when he is committing a fatal mistake. That's where we are, literally. Wow. Because this is the key of this whole story. And it was part of our discussions with our Russian interlocutors today. Trump, if he goes ahead with this attack, he'll be launching an attack against 3 BRICS nations: Russia, China, backing Iran. So this is part of his war against the global South, which, by the way, was fully endorsed by his Secretary of State in Munich only a few days ago. His speech is basically, we are at war with the global South, in a very polite way, in a European setting, with glasses of champagne. But that's what it is. It's a war against BRICS. It's a war against the top BRICS, and it's a war against the global South as a whole, because the objective of Trump 2.0 is to recolonize the global South with the Munich.
Wow. Well, all right, Pepe, thank you very much. I know you've had a long day, and I know it's late. It's close to midnight in Moscow.
It's 11, still early.
Oh, all right. All right. You're going to go out in the snow, I know. Thank
exactly.
you.
I'm going for a snow walk now. Snowboarding next.
Yes. Thank you, my dear friend. Be safe. God bless you. Thanks for everything. All the best.
All the best. Thank you, Judge. Thank you.
Thank you. Coming up at 3:30 on all of this, plus his unique insight on what the Israeli security forces attempted to do to our friend Tucker Carlson at the Tel Aviv airport. Who else? Max Blumenthal. 3:30 today. Judge Napolitano for Judging Freedom.
Nixon here with Scott Ritter, and we got a lot of things to talk about. Let's talk. It's pretty horrifying. Your thoughts on the situation in the Middle East?
Yeah, anybody who's encouraging a conflict at any time, is sort of exposing your lack of humanity. I have said from day one that war is the ultimate failure of mankind, because what it represents is humans killing humans, and that's a failure of everything. There should have been so much more we could have done prior to getting to that point to resolve whatever issue there was, without falling back on systemic violence. Here we have a situation though where we're talking about a war on a scope and scale that will easily rival the war in Ukraine in terms of technology, lethality, and potential geopolitical repercussions, even potentially expanding beyond the scale of Ukraine, because this conflict could bring down the global economy by generating a massive energy crisis around the world. So, there's all that. Then you factor in, that even though this is ostensibly between the United States and Iran, it's between the United States and Russia and China, BRICS, the impact this conflict will have on the ongoing global transformation that's underway as we speak, away from, the unipolar hegemony of American global dominance to one where power and influence is shared amongst nations on an equal basis. I don't know. Did you see Marco Rubio's speech at?
It was insane. It was absurd.
I mean, it's just basically, he jettisons the rule-based international order, which is a good thing. He said, we don't do that anymore. We're much worse. We're about re-empowering European colonialism. We're about, uniting with Europe to go back into the global South and teach those little brown people who's boss. That's literally what his speech was about. And, it was shocking that the Europeans stood and applauded that. He should have been, had rotten vegetables thrown at him on the way out. But one of the dangers of this Iran, there's danger all around. There's the danger the United States may lose, and we don't understand what the consequences will be when a nuclear armed superpower, hits a brick wall. What will, the leader of this cult of personality that currently governs the United States decide to do when he is confronted with the reality that his military misadventure may cost him midterm elections? Will he declare martial law in the United States? Will he precipitate a declaration of martial law in the United States by engaging in a nuclear war with Iran, who had the gall to defeat him? But equally as dangerous is if the United States wins and we successfully overthrow the Iranian regime, because now we've empowered this megalomaniac who believes now he can do anything because, of course, he was successful in Venezuela, and now he would have been proven to be successful in Iran. And the arrogance that will, because he's surrounded by arrogant people, the empowerment to Pete Hegseth, to Marco Rubio, and to others, it'll be extraordinarily dangerous. It'll allow Rubio to jumpstart his recolonialization program. And it will set China up to be the next victim, because if we beat Iran, I can guarantee you we're going to be looking at turning Taiwan into a major roadblock to Chinese expansion, meaning that the one China policy will go out the window with just about every other agreement the United States has ever made. And we will seek to fortify Taiwan and use it as a stopper to block, Chinese regional expansion. We're not going to be talking about holding China at the second island chain or the first island chain. We're going to hold them right there at Taiwan. And what does that lead to? We have a nation right now that's, we see what happens when we break free of, rules, the rule of law, treaties, new start. Guys, it's much worse than anybody can possibly understand. In addition to basically quadrupling the size of our strategic nuclear force, we're rewriting our nuclear doctrine because we got more toys to play with. So we can do, more innovative things, like a preemptive strike against Russia now is on the table. And I can guarantee you we have people right now building that war plan. A preemptive strike against China now moves to the front burner, meaning that if we're ever in a situation like in Taiwan where it looks like China might be doing something that could stymie us, we just take them out. We blow up we launch a counterforce strike, take out their nuclear arsenal, and tell China, you're now powerless in the face of the United States. We're moving into Taiwan. There's not a damn thing you can do about it. And then the question is, what will Russia do in that regard? And then we don't know the answer to that, but you probably should know the answer to that before you go down that path. And perhaps most dangerous, and nobody's really talking about, is this is the end of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. It's done. It's finished. It's gone. It doesn't count anymore. Aragchi, the foreign minister, spoke at the Council of Disarmament in Geneva, or in Vienna, I believe. Where was it? Geneva. And he said, if the United States attacks us, it's a complete violation of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Not that any American cares, because not too many Americans even know about the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. But the rest of the world cares, because it's an indication that the United States refuses to abide by its obligation as a nuclear power, not to attack a signatory to the NPT. And yet that's what we're getting ready to do. But it's even worse than that, because
Switch to TurboTax. File.
We are reversing the trajectory we need to be to comply with our responsibility under the NPT. We say Iran can't have a nuclear weapons program. That's true. But, we're not supposed to have one in perpetuity. We are obliged under the NPT to actually work to get to zero. And the trajectory that we had been following on arms control was getting us in that direction. 30,000, 12,000, 6,000, 1,550. But now we're back up to 4,000, 5,000, 6,000, potentially to go even higher. That means that the United States has betrayed its trust. Nobody can trust us anymore. We've made nuclear weapons, in vogue again. And here's the result. Brazil almost immediately started an internal discussion saying Brazil needs to go nuclear.
Turkey also. Turkey
refused to answer. And the Polish president just said Poland needs to go nuclear. I'm pretty much here to tell you that we'll be dealing with double digits of nations that decide to get a nuclear weapons program because of what the Trump administration has done. And to compound everything, we're going to start testing nuclear weapons again. I can't say I didn't tell you so, because I told you so. But they're just walking away from what has been a voluntary compliance with the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. We have never, even though it was signed, we've never ratified it. But we have agreed with Russia and China not to test nuclear weapons. Now we're accusing Russia and China of cheating. We have no evidence of this. I can guarantee you that. We have speculation. But there's no evidence that Russia and China cheated, but now we're accusing them of cheating. So we say, therefore, we will resume nuclear testing. So basically, almost 6 decades legacy of arms control is gone. We're going back to ground zero. But remember, when ground zero originally existed in the mid 1960s, we're talking about the United States having a handful of, antiquated, liquid fueled missiles, some early on solid fuel missiles. But, again, we're dealing with warheads that number in the, hundreds, with the Soviets lagging behind. Today, we're talking about the most advanced weapons in the world. And gosh, if we want to enter an arms race with Russia, we've already allowed them to lap the field several times. I mean, I just want to point out the uncomfortable reality that while the United States has been violating arms control treaties, withdrawing from arms control treaties, turning their back on arms control, Russia has been engaged in a strategic nuclear deterrent modernization program designed to account for America's lack of good faith. In 2016, Putin warned American journalists that there is a consequence to withdrawing from the ABM treaty, and that means that Russia will have to build a new generation of weapons that can maintain Russia's deterrence in the face of an American effort to build a missile defense force. In 2018, he said, you guys didn't listen to me, did you? So here are the weapons we're doing. Sarmat, heavy ICBM, can come in from the South Pole, no defense known to it. Burevestnik, nuclear-powered cruise missile, no defense against it. Avant-Garde, hypersonic maneuvering warhead, no defense against it. Poseidon, the weapon that stands offshore, goes off and drowns the entire East Coast, no defense against it. And even then, the United States didn't listen because Russia, once again, in the renegotiation of New START in 2021, was willing to put these weapons on the table and talk about this thing if the United States would integrate missile defense into the arms control scheme. We didn't do it. And now here we are today. Russia is deploying these weapons as we speak. What are we doing? Well, we were going to build the Sentinel, ground-based missile deterrent system. Can't afford it. Can't build it on time. So we're taking a missile that was built in the late 1960s, early 1970s, the Minuteman III, and we're going to modernize it one last time. But the one last time was the time before where we allowed the lifespan to go up to 2030. And even then, people were like, we can't guarantee that's going to work. Now we're saying 2050. So we're breathing 20 more years worth of life in it because we don't have the ability to build a new ballistic missile. Meanwhile, Russia, in addition to these new weapons they've put out, are in the process of testing more advanced ballistic missiles to replace the missiles that already exist. They're on par to just keep modernizing, adapting to America's irresponsible behavior. We are talking about replacing the Ohio-class submarines with a new class, but we don't have the shipbuilding capacity to produce the submarines necessary. We need to upgrade the Trident missile, do a life extension plan on it. We don't know if we have the capacity to do that. We can do it in limited numbers, but to, modernize the entire fleet, hundreds of missiles, it'll take decades. The B-21 bomber is just too damn expensive. And we have to build a lot of them to, if we want to modernize our the air part of the triad. So we've entered into an arms race that we're already, it's like entering a marathon where the field, including the top runners, are halfway down the track, and you're just starting, you're not going to catch up. But we're going to bankrupt ourselves too. This is the other thing, the stress we're going to put on our budget at a time when we're talking about the need to modernize everywhere else. There was an exercise in Estonia, Hedgehog 2025. You may have read about it. where the Ukrainians brought in a handful of frontline FPV drone operators. We're not talking full spectrum drone warfare. We're just talking about a bunch of guys, a handful are going to go down, hunker down, and just take apart the attackers with using standard frontline drone tactics developed by the Russians and the Ukrainians. And they annihilated the NATO forces. The NATO forces never even got off the starting block. As soon as they moved, they were hit by drones. They had no counter drone capability, no ability to respond, and they all died. So it's funny when you hear NATO say, we're going to build our military. Well, first you got to rebuild it and you got to redefine it. And you don't have the money to do that, so I'm not worried about you. I mean, if you go around building, speaking of building, 300 to 800,000 more of what you have, when what you have doesn't work, it's pretty stupid. And the U.S. military is in the same boat. We have legacy divisions. A U.S. armored division has zero life expectancy on a modern battlefield. It's just the reality of the situation. We have to modernize. That costs a lot of money. And where are we going to get this money? Now we come back to Iran. What if we have a war with Iran? And even if we win, if Iran is able to carry out its threat to disrupt energy production in the region, we have a global energy crisis. What's that do to the dollar? What's that do to the economy? It's trying. Then I come back to the ultimate problem. We have a madman in the White House, a literal madman who governs. It's a cult of personality. We don't want to go too far down the constitutional rabbit hole, even though I keep my copy of the Constitution right here, because I'm reading it every single day, and I'm rereading the Federalist Papers, and I'm rereading the Anti-Federalist Papers, and I'm getting back to what the hell our founding fathers were thinking when they created this country and how far we've deviated from that. But we have a madman right now who is literally positioning himself to declare martial law in the United States. And I believe if he's confronted with a scenario where it's inevitable he will lose the midterm elections, that this madman, this narcissist, will never allow that to happen. And that there will be a crisis that he will use to trigger martial law. And if we do have an election, it will be an election that will be held under circumstances which will guarantee a Trump victory or Republican victory in the House. And one of the reasons is nobody knows anything about the Constitution. Nobody understands that everything this man is doing is just fundamentally wrong. When you sit there and say you don't need a warrant to do an ICE search, you can use a bench warrant. You don't need you can use an administrative warrant. You don't need a warrant from the bench. That the Fourth Amendment never applied. It never was meant to apply to illegal aliens. Pro-Hent, the Supreme Court's already decided multiple times that it does apply specifically to illegal aliens. It just shows the ignorance of the American public about the Constitution, about what it means to be a constitutional republic. And we have devolved into a nation of factions. Now, what's the danger of that? Federalist Paper number 10. You might want to read about it, the danger of factions. We have devolved into a nation of factions. And one of the goals of having a strong union was to ensure that the federal government could protect us against factions, except that the federal government has to protect itself against executive overreach, which is where checks and balances come in. But right now, we've done exactly what the anti-federalists were worried about. We have a federal court system that has been hijacked by a political party. So it's no longer doing the bidding of the rule of law. It's supporting a faction. And we have a Congress that has likewise allowed itself not to be defined by duty to the nation and support of the Constitution, but support for political factions. And so now the worst thing that all the anti-federalists feared is about to happen. We are devolving into a dictatorship, a tyranny, where the rule of law doesn't matter. There are no checks and balances. And when you have an executive with unfettered power, this is why what happened in Minneapolis is so important. We, the people of the United States, sat back and allowed the federal government to mobilize 3,000 paramilitary operatives who seized control of a city.
Yeah, there's just so many problems here. And you well articulated a number of them. Let me ask you this. I know you've been paying attention to the Geneva so-called, I mean, you know, they're referred to as peace talks, they're referred to as negotiations. But I mean, when you send, you know, there are people that think that Kushner and Witkoff are legitimate diplomats. I don't, because they're not diplomats. They have not been chosen. They have not been ratified by the Senate. They have nothing. They're just a couple of schleps that Trump said, these guys are close to me, my golfing buddy and my son-in-law. That means nothing in the real world. And I know the Russians know that. But it seems to me the Russians are, in a gentlemanly manner, going through the motions of talking to whoever they need to talk to, whoever the U.S. sends to. They even talk to the Ukrainians as they come there and rant and rave and make lunatic and expose the lunacy of the regime there. Your thoughts on the so-called talks, and as the last time you and I were in Russia and we talked over and over and said, there's only one way to win a war, and that's to win a war, and that's what's going to happen here. Anyway, put all that together, talks in Geneva, the whole 9 yards. Your thoughts on it?
Well, first of all, let's break down the Iranian talks. There's no serious diplomacy here. The United States has one policy only, and that's regime change. It's a stated policy stated by the president. Recently, I mean, he's made repeated comments on his Truth Social media about Khomeini must go. It's time to bring this regime to an end. And Jared Kushner, the 50% of the negotiating team, prior to going to Oman to begin the negotiations, had a meeting in Florida with Iranian American business leaders to create the transition council that will take control in Iran once we remove the regime. So here's the man who's supposed to be negotiating a deal with Iran to avoid a conflict, an existential crisis. But he's given away the game plan by meeting with the people whom he is positioned to take over from the regime, you know, when the military action that's being set up by this diplomacy begins. And this is exactly what's happening. I mean, the whole purpose of this, you know, Witkoff's job was to breathe false hope into the Iranians. And that's what he did in Geneva. He gave them false hope. Look at Aragchi. Poor Aragchi came out and said, hey, there's something positive here. We're going back to Iran and we're going to work on a text so we can meet in 2 weeks in Geneva and move forward on this. We have an agreed framework. And the Iranians are all excited about this, and they're all running back to Tehran. They're all doing the hard work. And Witkoff and Kushner are high-fiving each other because they succeeded. Now they'll turn to Russia, which I'll get to in a second. But, you know, what's happening in these 2 weeks? You know, the Oman talks were simply to buy time for the United States to reinforce the missile defense shield. I mean, I don't know if people have been counting C-17 flights in and out of the Middle East, but pretty much you can say every 73 flights equals a Patriot battery. I think it's slightly less than that. You get a THAAD battery. But, you know, we've deployed at least 2 THAAD batteries, which would bring us up to 4 in the region, 50% of America's capacity, you know, capability on THAAD globally. And I think, you know, we probably saw another 2 to 3 Patriot batteries brought in. You know, raising the number, you know, close to 10, maybe 12 total deployed there. We have 15 total in the world. You know, and 2 of them are in Ukraine. So, you know, we forward deployed, front loaded a whole bunch of air defense while Oman was taking place. So why go to Geneva? To get to Iran, to go to Tehran, get the Iranians to go to Tehran for 2 weeks, working on a nuclear plan while we surge in our strike capacity. And some say by Saturday, we will have 2 carrier battle groups with approximately 160 you know, combat aircraft, backed up by hundreds of American tactical fighters, fighter bombers, tankers, electronic warfare aircraft, AWACS, the airborne early, the warning and control command post things. Basically, we have restructured our military posture in the Middle East to carry out a weeks-long air campaign that has a specific mission and kind of regime change. But it's also one that's linked to Israel's demands, Israel's requirement that we can't be hit by missiles in a sustained fashion. So look at the structure of the aircraft going in. I don't know if people do that. They tend to say, oh, this many, this many, this many. A lot of F-16s. The bulk of the F-16s are what they call wild weasel variants. These are suppression of enemy air defense. These are the aircraft that go in and take out enemy air defense. They're specifically trained. They have highly specialized equipment. The pilots are skilled in this operation. Why do we have so many wild weasels? Because normally you wouldn't be seeking to go in and directly interdict like that. If you're doing standoff attacks, you'd use other weapon systems to take out air defense. But this is going in to suppress the air defense so that we can control the skies over that territory. Why? Because we're going to impose aerial dominance over the ballistic missile operational areas of Iran up front. The idea here is to ensure that the Iranians will not be able to launch barrages of missiles. If any missiles get away, it'll be one or two sneaking out. Then we've got this new layered missile defense system that we think should be able to shoot it down. But even if it can't, the damage sustained by Israel or our bases will be minimal because it won't be a barrage. And we have the ability now to sustain this operation for weeks. That's what is happening here. And if you take the ballistic missiles off the map, at least maybe not totally, but you give Israel greater potential because Israel will be involved as well. We know that we can turn on and off demonstrations in Iran at will, and we'll be turning them on. And we know because we collected the intelligence information about who the Iranians mobilized, when and where and how, will be suppressing the ability of Iran to respond to these demonstrations. And as President Trump has threatened, we probably know where the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei is, and we're going to kill him. And we're going to kill the Pezeshkian, the president. We'll kill the parliament. We're going to decapitate the Iranian leadership. That's our goal. That's our objective. And having been at White House National Security Council meetings, I know questions are asked. I know the kind of questions that are asked. And I can guarantee that when those people possessing the intelligence about the pattern of life activity of Khamenei, we'll call them the CIA, say, we have the pattern of life of Khamenei and we're convinced we can kill him, people will come back and say, how do you know? What level of confidence do you have? And for the president to greenlight an action like this, the CIA will have to come back with a very high level of confidence, which now begs the other question. The last time the president was this cocky about regime change was Maduro. And you and I have had this conversation before. Many people thought that Venezuela would put up a bigger fight. That'd be impossible to knock out the regime. People were running to the streets and all that stuff. And now we have the vice president basically behaving as a tool of the United States, allowing an American embassy to be reopened in Caracas, complete with a complete CIA contingent who will be handling off the payments to all the people they bought off. U.S. oil companies dominating Venezuelan oil. We bought people off. And there was a high degree of confidence in our ability to do that before we launched the Delta Force kidnapping mission. I'm reading between the lines here, but I'm thinking that the CIA and Israel have bought off a lot of senior Iranians. I'm thinking that their reach goes deeper than anybody could possibly know because there's a whole lot of confidence here, a whole lot of confidence on a very risky operation. So I don't want a war. I'm not cheering on a war. But there's this notion that the United States is automatically setting itself to fail. I wouldn't put money on that bet. Knowing the United States military as well as I do, having sat in on meetings like this, knowing the questions that are...
Scott said Iran was going to fall during the 12-day war. Passport was taken, bank account seized. Scott is used as a tool to do psychological warfare against the Iranians. That's a fact.
That are asked, and knowing the stakes that are involved. There is a series of lights that have to go from red to green before the military, not the president, the military would sign off on something like this, because the military isn't in the business of committing suicide. You don't get to be a aircraft squadron commander by saying, send my guys into the storm and I don't care if none of us come back. You get to command by saying, these are the tactics we use to guarantee a positive outcome. That I understand. I have a multi-million-dollar aircraft here with a pilot that costs a lot of money to train, and I'm not just going to send him out to fight and die, Mr. President. Give me a mission we can do, and we'll do it, but don't send me on a suicide mission. And I think right now the fact that we are deploying forward, first of all, I believe we've crossed the line of no return. There comes a point in the tip fiddle, they call it, the troop phase fiddle.
Nathan Watkins doesn't believe in limits, especially limits on your property taxes. Watkins testified against Governor Abbott's property tax caps, saying,
Tax caps.
Logistics deployment or something of that nature. But basically it's what we have to do to get people from point A to the operation area and sustain them for a period of time. And once you start moving something this big, you reach a point that during the Gulf War, 1991, even though we attacked in January, mid-January, the point of no return was reached in October. I was on a planning cell in the headquarters Marine Corps, and we were asking the question, are we doing hypothetical planning where we can reach and grab any asset we want? Or are we asset constrained, meaning that there's a real war about to happen and there are things that we won't be able to touch, and et cetera? And they said, no, you're asset constrained because we've crossed the line of departure. We're going to war. And so these resources won't be available to you. You have to deal with these resources, et cetera. I think we're at that point right now. I think that we have deployed so much forward. We've spent so much money. We've done so much global repositioning that we can't dismantle this, return it, and bring it back. So we have to use it now. So we are committed on a course of action which makes war inevitable. And the other thing that solidifies my belief that we are going to war is the midterm elections. I think this president has made a calculation that he has no choice but to win a war against Iran, because things are looking bad for him politically. Because of his action with ICE in Minneapolis and elsewhere, he's in danger of losing the House. Some people say it's pretty much a foregone conclusion that he will lose the House. And if he gets embarrassed, with Iran right now, combined with the inability to deliver on Ukraine, he could lose the Senate.
Or he might not make it to he could get run out of office. Literally.
People are talking about the 25th Amendment.
Yeah, he could get run
But
out.
again, the 25th Amendment only applies if the Constitution applies, and the Constitution doesn't apply if martial law is declared. So I think this president is playing high stakes gamble. Some people say it's because of the Epstein files. I don't know about that. But I do know there's a lot of political pressure being put on this president on the domestic front that begs for a foreign policy crisis. And Iran is a crisis that the president believes he can gamble on and win on. So I think war is inevitable. And then that brings up, you said, well, people are encouraging Iran to preempt. Well, as an American, I don't want any harm to come to Americans. I really don't. I want every American that's deployed to come home safely. But we live in the real world, and there is a United Nations Charter. The United Nations Charter forbids the kind of actions that the United States is currently carrying out. We are in open violation of the Charter right now by threatening Iran with war. That's a violation of Article 4, Paragraph 2, I believe it is. We're in violation of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. We're in violation of just about everything that stands for the rule of law. But that's okay. The president says he doesn't believe in international law, rule of law, only in his own moral compass. But if the charter is truly invoked, then Iran can invoke Article 51, which is the right of self-defense. And it is something most Americans should, maybe Google up sometime. But the Caroline Doctrine, or the Caroline Affair, The Caroline Affair is an event that took place in 1838, 1840, around there. The Caroline was a U.S. ship that was running guns and men to Canadian rebels. And it was intercepted off the coast of Maine by British Navy. And we said, you attacked us. You've committed an act of aggression against us. And the British Navy said, no, we carried out preemptive self-defense because the Caroline represented an imminent threat to our national security that we had to preempt. It went to the United States Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court of the United States, in the Caroline decision, said yes. The Caroline represented an imminent threat, and the British had every right to interdict it. And that Supreme Court decision now has become a foundation of international law when it comes to preemption. Russia cited it, and it's
Yes, they did.
you're going into Ukraine, and Iran would have every right to do this. And in fact, that's the only way Iran emerges from this with any chance of survival, is to preempt what the United States is doing. I'm not
I'm saying
encouraging.
if I was Iran,
No.
same thing. I'm saying if I was Iran, if you said, if we're standing there and you say, well, I'm going to go outside and I'm going to get a club, and when I come back in, I'm going to hit you over the head with the club, I'd fight you now. I'd rather fight you. If I got to fight you, I'd rather fight you with no club than with a club. And if you said, okay, as soon as I get everything built up, I'm coming to get you, I'd say, well, why would I wait for you to get, you know what I mean? So I mean, just from a logical perspective.
President Trump trusts retired teacher Terry Leo Wilson because she's teaching liberals a lesson in Austin. Leo Wilson banned DEI.
It would make sense. And we don't want war. Both of us are very anti-war people, and we fight to oppose war, and we know the danger here. But just from a logical perspective, if someone is arraying their forces to use against you, it's sensible to say, if I'm going to fight you, why would I wait till you fight you at your strongest? I want to fight you at your weakest point.
And this again is where, Steve Witkoff will probably get the Presidential Medal of Freedom, because he did his job. He got the Iranians to believe that the United States was serious about negotiations. And they're off in Tehran chit-chatting away on how to build a text that'll be satisfactory for Steve Witkoff when they meet in 2 weeks in Geneva. You ain't going to be alive in 2 weeks, okay? You're going to be dead because we're going to attack you and we're going to kill you. And people say, well, that's ridiculous, Scott. Well, that's sort of what we did in June, isn't it? Setting them up with diplomacy and then letting Israel come in with a surprise attack that we helped facilitate to kill their negotiating team and kill their leadership. Past practices repeat. And I'm afraid that this is what we're seeing right now. This can't be just another example of Donald Trump's bluster, because as I said, we have dismantled air defense systems in South Korea and brought them to the Middle East. We've dismantled air defense systems elsewhere in the Pacific and brought them in to, defend Israel, to defend our bases. We have created a window of vulnerability in the Pacific theater that can't be left open forever. Eventually, these assets are going to have to be returned to the Pacific. If we do that without resolving the Iran problem, it just becomes too expensive. We can't, as I said, it's 73 C-17 sorties to bring in a Patriot battery. We'd have to dismantle everything, bring it back, and then if we ever decided we need to resolve Iran, do it again. That isn't going to happen. This is a one-time good deal. We're stripping ourselves bare here, thinning ourselves out in Europe, and maximizing capacity here. We are forward deploying the bulk of our combat air power. Again, thinning out resources that are on contingency elsewhere, creating windows of vulnerability. Hint, hint, China, Taiwan. So this is a one and done. We have to do it now or it's never going to be done again kind of arrangement. So that's why I feel confident, and I don't say there was glee, I say there was pain in my heart, that we're going to be striking Iran sooner rather than later. So there's my prognosis. And now in Russia, the famous negotiating team of Witkoff and Kushner, sounds like a bad law firm, has sat down with the Ukrainians and the Russians in Geneva to basically build upon what were deemed to be relatively successful negotiations that took place in Dubai previously. But what was interesting is the makeup of the negotiating teams. In Dubai, the Russians brought in a team that was, weighed heavily by military intelligence. And it's believed at that point in time that the Russians had laid out their position, which isn't going to change regarding, final disposition of territories, what Russia would accept and what Russia wouldn't accept. Russia keeps talking about the Alaska, the spirit of Alaska, and the Alaska solution. And again, they haven't spelled it out, but I believe that means that Ukraine withdraws from the totality of the Donbass, and that Russia freezes the line of contact where it currently is, and then they'll proceed from there once a ceasefire is declared. This would be painful for Russia, but it's what Vladimir Putin rolled into Alaska with in an effort to bring it into this conflict. So the military has spelled that out. So now the Ukrainians are in the position where they're, you see Budanov trying to say, we may have to accept this. So we should probably accept this and rapidly bring this thing to an end. But now we get to the rest of the story, which gets into security guarantees, and almost as importantly, the issue of, because the United States has defined security guarantees not just in terms of, what happens regarding Ukraine in the special military operation area of operations, what guarantees we do, to monitoring and all that stuff. But also we say that some of the best security guarantees we have for Ukraine is for the United States to be strategically committed economically with Russia. And, while Dubai was taking place, Kirill Dmitriev went to Miami and met with Witkoff. And from the Miami meeting came a paper with 7 points on it. And there's no name, there's nothing, but it was released and it's been discussed. And Dmitry Peskov, the spokesperson for the Kremlin, in addressing that paper, linked it to Dmitriev and said, we are discussing issues of this nature. He didn't specifically embrace the 7 points, but the 7 points are very, very curious, Garland. One of them is that Russia will oppose de-dollarization. Now, Peskov specifically addressed this when he said Russia's never been in favor of de-dollarization, that the person pushing de-dollarization is the United States. It's not Russia that said, no, we don't want to use the dollar. It was the United States that said, no, Russia can't use the dollar. And so we had no other choice. But if the United States is willing to make the dollar available in a guaranteed fashion, we're not opposed to using the dollar. And some people view that as a betrayal of BRICS and this concept of an alternative currency, et cetera. That Russia has been working out with China, but the fact of the matter is, it's not the yuan. What is the
renminbi or something? I never
or something like that. It's the Russians aren't happy with that. They feel they get the short end of the stick. India won't deal with the Chinese currency. They want to use the rupee, and the rupee is just not a good currency of conversion. And so far, BRICS hasn't solved the issue of how to do large trade deals using non-dollar denominations. They do it, but it's not efficient. One of the key aspects of the dollar is the efficiency of the dollar on global transactions. But there's other things.
All right, look, I don't know who need to hear this, but my man just tried that new 100 milligram generic Viagra for only 87 cents a pop from France.
Well, how about this, Scott? I can say this. The dollar could be a valuable tool for them. I don't think the Russians will ever get back to a point where they lean on the dollar, right? Or they put all of their stuff, put hundreds of billions of dollars in the West for somebody to grab it. But in their international trade, it is a valuable tool. One of the things I heard about rupees was they were selling stuff in rupees, but they ended up with a glut of rupees because they have lots more stuff to sell than India has to, you know what I mean? And sometimes you deal with a country, you end up with a glut of those particular things. If you can use the dollar, if you got a glut of rupees, you can transfer them into dollars, and you can put them in something else if you want to, back into rubles, whatever you want. But it's a valuable tool, I think, for international trade. Now, and I think people misunderstand if the Russians say, well, we will use the dollar again, to mean, well, they'll just go 100%. They'll like get rid of the ruble and just go with it. I don't think that's not what they're saying. They're saying the dollar will be part of the array of economic tools that we use to make things work. And when we need it, we can use it. And when we don't, you're the ones that said we can't use it under any circumstances. We never said we didn't ever want to use it. So at any rate, that's just the way I see it, Scott.
Well, that might be the Russian position, but the American position that Witkoff, because these are Witkoff's points that have been given to Kirill, is that Russia will commit to the dollar as a currency of international trade. That's one of the things that Russia needs to do. The other one is that Russia will open its economy to American capital investment, but that the United States will be getting all sorts of preferred interest rates, and Russia will open up its oil fields to American oil exploration companies. And basically, the 7 points imply almost a Russian surrender to the United States. And it makes me question the authenticity of this document, to be honest, because I see Peskov not denying it, but he didn't openly embrace it. And he only talked about one thing, which Putin has already addressed. Vladimir Putin has gone on record saying, we're not against the dollar. I mean, he said this many times. We didn't turn against the dollar turned against us. But all these other points sound like American wet dream fantasies. But what they're
sounds like remember the 28-point plan?
Yeah.
We've got a 28, and everybody was like, oh my gosh, you mean the Russians capitulated? And the Russians said, that's not the plan we agreed with in Alaska. We haven't even seen that plan. So you got to keep in a little bit of a historical context exactly what you're saying. There's times when the U.S. put something forward and the Russians are like, we're not going to comment it on much, but
I love some of the comments about the guy, Russia opening up their oil fields to the U.S. Is Scott out of his mind? Hey, I didn't come up with the idea. I'm simply telling you what's on the 7 points. Right. It's not me that's gone out of my mind. Whoever wrote that frickin' piece of paper that's gone out of their mind. And yet this has become part of the discussion. And this is where the Kushner and Witkoff come in, because they operate on a completely different plane. And it's a fantasy-driven plane. But the important thing about that 7 points is that it underscores a harsh reality, that the United States is not interested in bettering relations with Russia. The United States is interested in Russian capitulation across the board, economic capitulation that has the United States reasserting itself in a manner similar to the status we enjoyed in the 1990s, where we were the economic gurus running the Russian economy, and the Russian economy was subordinated to the American vision. And it's basically their pathway to bring down the presidency of Vladimir Putin. And here's the danger of Kirill Dmitriev, because I'm not saying that he is a party to this conspiracy. I don't believe he is. But I would say that just take a look at Gilbert Doctorow or John Helmer, two outside observers. They're both openly talking about an open division, a split in the Russian government over these issues, that there is a divide. People are turning against Putin. Putin's days are numbered. He's going down for the count. And this is something that I believe the Trump administration is trying to promote. I think that's the whole purpose of these negotiations, because we're not going to get the Russians to yield anything more than they already gave up in Alaska. And we're incapable of making Alaska happen. So what we're doing is we're dragging these deals out. We're creating the impression that we'll accept the military deal. Now we're getting down to these other details, and it's compelling the Russians to address these issues. And by addressing these issues, it creates the perception of a split. But as I've pointed out to people, and I know some people think I'm arrogant and I'm just tough shit. Maybe I am. Maybe I'm arrogant for a reason. And one of the reasons is I might know Russia better than you. And I will say this, that, one of Kirill Dmitriev is not a member of the Russian government. He's an outsider brought in who's been put in charge of forming a committee. All right. But a committee is not a department. A committee is not a ministry. Kirill Dmitriev is not the equal of Sergei Lavrov. Kirill Dmitriev is not the equal of, Balsamov, the defense minister. He's not the equal of the head of the FSB or the SVR. See, that's the government. That's the Russian government. And the Russian government is united on the plan that Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, put forward. But in order, in June of 2025, before Alaska, but to go to Alaska, it was opening up a new diplomatic opportunity, a new, mechanism of engagement, and this is where Witkoff and Dmitriev come in. They're not part of the system that was clashing. Lavrov and Rubio weren't getting along. Incompatible visions of the world. So Witkoff and Dmitriev come down and they have a common language, the language of business. I believe this was a trap set by the United States. I believe that the CIA is behind almost everything that's being done here with Russia. I don't believe the Trump administration has any good intent whatsoever toward Russia. And the CIA is playing the same game card they've been playing for a long time, which is basically to make Russia collapse from within. We succeeded in the Soviet Union. We controlled them using that mechanism under Boris Yeltsin, and we're trying to revive it. Look at Joe Biden when he went there in March of 2011. When Dmitry Medvedev was the president, we were saying, you need to stay as president. Don't allow Vladimir Putin back in. Biden literally said in the lead up to a Russian election, it wouldn't be good for Vladimir Putin or Russia if he became president again. And let me make it clear. We got a lot of American capitalists out there who want to come and invest money into Russia. And we're ready to do that. We want to make it happen. But to do that, you've got to go through political reforms. You've got to change. You've got to do things that give us greater power. You've got to release central power. You've got to give power to these opposition groups that we've made. We have to have a say over how our money is used in Russia and all this stuff. That's the 7-point plan that Kirill Dmitriev is touting right now. It's a CIA master plan for collapsing Russia from within. And I would hope, I know that some Russians see this because I've spoken to them.
Well,
and these are Russians that are quite senior.
Let me throw this in. And I continue to listen to and read what Lavrov says. Boy, he's on a different path. Lavrov said recently, he said, look, these people won't even change the laws for Russian speakers. In fact, when they had some meeting, and the Ukrainians always do this. So they had some meeting when they were having some kind of meetings, and Sergei Lavrov said in one of his recent speeches, he said, look, they have to change the laws and allow Russian speakers to speak their language, to worship as they please, to all those kinds of things. Immediately after, and you know this to be coming, the Ukrainians said, we're going to pass another law and make it illegal for them to completely outlaw the church. So anytime the Russians say anything like, well, they're going to have to allow them to eat rye bread, the Ukrainians will say, the rye bread is illegal. And so Lavrov's, I listen to, it's kind of like Putin and Medvedev. It's kind of like Kirill Dmitriev and Lavrov. One of the things the Russians seem adept at doing is always having somebody who says, we're close to a deal, we got a deal, things are looking good, and always having some guy who's a bulldog saying, these people are a bunch of idiots. You know what I mean? It's like they play that, but they're very subtle in the way they do it.
Yeah, no, well,
File your taxes 100% free in the app if you didn't file with us last year. Just file with TurboTax Do-It-Yourself.
Look, I have to admit, Dmitriev's confused me from day one. I've been trying to interview him, and we follow each other on Telegram and on Twitter. But so far, I've not been able to get the interview, and I'm thinking there's a reason why, because I think Dmitriev knows that I'm onto him. Not that he's doing anything wrong, just the opposite. I think Dmitriev is a Russian setup.
Me too.
I think that basically, Putin and everybody went, is Trump serious? Because they've been screwed by Trump before. This is not their first rodeo with Trump. Remember, first term, I want to be friends with Russia. You guys are the greatest thing since sliced bread. But it fins up, I was the strongest on Russia. I put more sanctions, and he didn't say it, but I built 20 CIA bases designed to carry out offensive intelligence operations inside Russian territory for the purpose of bringing down Vladimir Putin. Another unsaid thing, I allowed the CIA to give targeted information to the Ukrainians, so 91 drones could be fired against the residence of the Russian president while I was talking to the Russian president while he was in that residence. These are things that nobody talks about, but they should be just blindingly obvious. So now, when the Russians are saying, what do we do about the Americans? Well, you can't just shut down diplomacy because that could push the United States into doing things that it doesn't want to do, but it's given no other option. But if you lead the United States on into thinking that they're getting in the direction they want, and you sap resources away, you divert attention, meanwhile, while you accomplish everything you said you wanted to accomplish, look what the Russians have done. They've had no deviation on the front lines whatsoever. And they've actually got Donald Trump to turn a blind eye to this new energy war, which Russia is winning, because Trump is in love with the 7-point economic plan, which Kirill Dmitriev is carrying around in his hot little hands and going around Russia and having people talk about it. And Peskov's talking about it in public. And now Gilbert Doctorow, who is the ultimate MI6 disinformation agents, going, there's a split inside Russia. Putin's going down. And John Helmer's reading up, oh, yeah, there's a split. There's a split. This is really bad. This is really bad. And yet everybody who knows Russia and goes to Russia going, I don't see no split. And so it makes you wonder, what the hell is Dmitriev doing? I think the guy's going to end up with being called a hero of Russia. I think he'll go down in history as like one of the greatest intelligence ploys that's been played out, because he is put out there. He got Witkoff and Kushner latched onto him, and he got Trump right there. And the Americans think that they're dragging Russia in a certain direction, but it's Russia actually dragging America in a direction. And one of these days, the Russians are going to say, we're not going to do any of that. Oh, by the way, we already won the war. What are you going to do about it? Kind of thing. And, compounding that, it was indirect, but we go back to Hedgehog 2025. I mean, NATO's sitting there talking. I mean, they just had the Munich Security Conference where all the NATO transgendered lesbians came out and thumped their chests and talked about how bright their lipstick was and how they were going to build the biggest armies in the world and reassert their authority. And they were going to be so big and they were so strong and they're just going to be so militarized. And yet a handful of Ukrainian drone operators who mastered the art of drone fare on the battlefield against Russian drone operators wiped out the NATO forces, wiped them out. Couldn't even get out of the starting blocks. Now the question is, what would America do? How would America perform? And I'm telling you right now, we didn't perform any better because we're not prepared for that warfare either. And so it's not like the United States has many options. Europe, how excited are the British and the French going to be now? Yeah, we're going to send several thousand of our studly NATO troops into Ukraine to force those Russians to back down. The Russians going, yeah, we can demobilize most of our guys. We just need 50 drone operators and we got you taken care of. What I mean? So, it's, I think there's more to this Dmitriev than meets the eye, and I think that's one of the reasons why the Russians won't talk to me about it. It's the same reason why, they'll talk to other people about Oreshnik. But when I say, hey, I'd like to talk about Oreshnik, they're like, we don't want to talk to you. Because I'll ask the right questions, and they just don't want to answer those questions. They don't want to talk about it. That's not a discussion they're ready to have right now. Maybe later. And I think that's the case with Dmitriev, because I think there's a game being played here.
Two words. Roman Protasevich. I'll never forget that guy's name. It was somewhere around 2020, 2021. The West tried to do a regime change operation, the usual color revolutions in Belarus. And this guy, Roman Protasevich, was like, him and his girlfriend were leading it, and they had the top Telegram channels, and they led the protest, and they led everything. And then they tried to escape, and they got on a plane, and before they could get out of the plane, Belarus forced the plane down and took them both off the plane. It was on news. They were handcuffed and everything. And the West how dare you? He was a freedom fighter, blah, blah, blah. And then about a year ago, there was some articles in there, and Roman Protasevich was standing there with Lukashenko getting an award because he was a spy for. So you had a Belarusian spy that was running and operating the whole thing.
The whole time, and he's getting this medal. I don't know if his girlfriend was in on it or did she get a girlfriend medal too. I mean, it was amazing. But this is the kind of deep game that the serious intelligence services do. Unfortunately, the CIA is no longer a serious intelligence agency. We don't have the patience for that kind of sophistication. The Israelis do. The Israelis are able to pull that kind of stuff off. We're not. But yeah, you're right. Kudos to the Belarusian KGB because they did it good. Unfortunately, Garn, I got to run. I got a dental appointment, so I've got to.
Planning to publish your book?
World teeters on the brink of a war throughout the world. It's not necessarily a world war, although the Russian Navy is now in the firing line of the U.S. Armada, that big, beautiful armada that Donald Trump has sent to the Persian Gulf, which must have particularly acute feelings for my next guest, Trita Parsi. As I said, is Iranian-born, but he's a very dispassionate, scientific analyst of events in the Gulf and elsewhere. And I'm glad to say he joins us now. Vice President of the Quincy Institute. Trita, welcome for the first time to the Mother of All talk shows. The situation could scarcely be
once before.
Yeah.
I've been with you once before, I think, but it was
on the Mother of All talk shows.
Yeah, I believe so.
Wow, my sincere apologies. And such a handsome face, how could I have forgotten it? Must have been on the radio, Trita. But the situation could scarcely be more grave, could it? How are you viewing it?
I see it as tremendously grave, and I see it as such not only because I think war would be devastating, that I think that there's a significant risk of a civil war inside of Iran following that, but also because the incentive structure for both sides now appear to be in favor of some form of escalation. From the U.S. side, of course, the administration believes that their overwhelming force benefits them and that using it or at least threatening it will eventually cause the Iranians to capitulate. I've seen zero evidence for that so far. I don't think that's going to change. But also from the Iranian side, they, I think, correctly recognize that Trump seems to have an exaggerated view of how much relative power Iran has lost, and as a result thinks that capitulation is in the cards, and believe that Iran, though much weaker than the US, obviously has one advantage, which is that Trump's pain tolerance is much lower, and that if there is a confrontation between the two sides that is very intense and the Iranians strike at the US very, very hard, that this could cause President Trump to back off because he is looking for quick victories. This would not be a quick victory. And the Iranians don't have to win the war. They just need to make sure that they destroy Trump's presidency before they lose the war, which is a very different proposition. That doesn't mean that they won't take huge hits. They clearly will. But I think at this point, they don't believe that they have any way out of this. And this is then leading to a scenario in which the likelihood of war is just going up. These talks that were held in Geneva yesterday, I think I won't say that they're theatrics, but it doesn't seem as if from the US side there was really a genuine approach towards diplomacy. They go there with essentially a capitulation offer, and they want to check in on the Iranians to see if the Iranians are ready to capitulate, given how much military power the US has amassed. And if not, let's meet again in 2 weeks and see if you're ready by then. Rather than an actual negotiations in which the two sides exchange offers, ideas, proposals, etc. As I understand it, from what I heard from the talks, the proposals came from the Iranian side, not from the US side. The US was essentially only offering terms of capitulation, and that was not something that the Iranians were going to accept.
Trita, isn't it the case that the US is refusing to take yes for an answer? They said it was about nuclear, and the Iranians have said yes about nuclear. They've said you can have inspections to guarantee that we are not developing a nuclear weapon. And that's not enough for Donald Trump. A new JCPO is not enough for Donald Trump. The capitulation terms that you refer to or allude to are that Iran should make itself defenseless, that it should have no missile capability, even though its adversaries all have missile capability, that it should break its relations with all of its friends and allies across the Arab and indeed Muslim world. These are negotiating tactics that are designed to fail, aren't they?
Yes and no. I think, first of all, you're quite right that when it comes to demands on missiles and other things, I mean, it's really just capitulation at the end of the day. You're absolutely correct about that. And there's a reason why the Iranians are not saying yes to that, obviously. If they were to give up their missiles at this point, that would be the last deterrence that they have against Israel. Hezbollah has been much weakened. Many of these other organizations have been much weakened. They tended to form a first line of defense for the Iranians. It's now more or less gone. Without the missiles, the Iranians have no ability to strike back at Israel. And the Israelis are very worried about the missiles precisely because it limits Israel's maneuverability in the region. It challenges Israel's desire for domination and hegemony. So, but without them, then Iran would turn into what Syria was. As soon as Assad was on a plane to Moscow, the Israelis started bombing everything in Syria to make sure that the next regime would have no capacity whatsoever to pose any challenge to Israel's domination and hegemony. But even on the nuclear issue, because as I understand that these talks actually did focus almost exclusively on the nuclear issue, the position there too has been now something that goes well beyond what is necessary in order for the US to achieve its interests. If its interest is defined as no nuclear weapon, that's fine. But that is not what's being asked for. Essentially is giving up a complete, all elements of the nuclear program, not even in return for sanctions relief, but in return for no new sanctions. But reality is there's hardly any new sanctions that could be imposed at this point. So even when it is reduced to the nuclear variable, which should be resolvable if there is an approach that is based on what Trump talked about earlier on and what he still talks about, which is no nuclear weapon, you actually can find ways to be able to meet both sides' interest on that, but not if it is combined with some sort of an exaggerated maximalist approach, which appears to be what is taking place right now. And that goes back to the core of your issue. Is this just done in order to have an excuse to go to war? I think for those who have been pushing variables such as missiles, etc., yes, those are poison pills from the Israelis. They want these talks to collapse. I don't think Trump wants the talks to collapse. I think, however, Trump only sees capitulation as the acceptable outcome for him. So he's going for capitulation. And when the Iranians say no, he just moved more military assets there in the hope that that will convince them. I don't think it will. And in Trump's mind, perhaps he's doing this to avoid war, but he's only increasing the likelihood of war.
Well, I mean, of course, Trump's art of the deal does include browbeating and even bludgeoning and threatening. But it's gone beyond the art of the deal now. The proportion of U.S. armed force that is now in the Gulf And the word that I got today from an impeccable source, someone who definitely is in a position to know, the decision is made and the action is imminent. And therefore, that begs the question, as some of our callers, actually from the Gulf, have just been asking me, why doesn't Iran preemptively strike the armada that is up against them, and which is clearly, under international law, a clear and present danger and threat to them? Mightn't their military position be enhanced by firing the first shot?
Yes, but only in a scenario in which they have concluded that war is completely unavoidable. Because if they start a war, then they will have a war. But if they still believe that war is avoidable, and clearly their preference is not to have a war, only in that scenario would it potentially make sense. But it would also change dynamics in various ways. If the Iranians are the ones attacking, what will that do to the likelihood of a couple of weeks of warfare actually leading to Trump backing down? I mean, the whole premise of them thinking that they will gain something out of a potential confrontation if they have to, is that by making it as costly as possible for Trump, they will convince him to back down. But if they're the ones who are firing the first shot, does that change that equation? Does it change the psychology on the American side, in which backing off becomes an absolutely non-option for the Americans if they were the ones that were attacked? Even though, of course, they were amassing to attack themselves. So I think there's a lot of different factors that come into play here. The military advantage one is only one of those factors. There's psychological factors that come into play. There are political factors that come into play, as well as what that does to the relations with some of the GCC states. At the end of the day, the Iranians have invested heavily in trying to improve relations with Saudi Arabia and with many of their neighbors. They're already risking a lot of that if they start attacking facilities in the GCC, whether it is American bases or whether it is civilian oil installations. But on top of that, if they're the ones who are actually starting the war, what does that do to the psychology of some of their neighbors that so far they've not been on Iran's side, but they've been on the side of avoiding war?
And of course, it would affect their relations with the two superpower allies that they have, one of which, Russia, is currently engaged in naval exercises with the Iranian Navy. I refer, of course, to Russia. And China also has vital interests in Iran and vital interests in the preservation of the Iranian state, the avoiding of balkanization, the avoiding of the civil war you alluded to earlier. Russia and China might well be affected by a preemptive retaliation by Iran. But as I'm talking about them, if the war begins, if you will allow that hypothesis, what will the attitude of Russia and China be?
Well, I think we saw that in Venezuela, the Russians and the Chinese were taken by surprise, and their response was very, very muted. I've spoken to officials from those countries who say that they will not have the same response if this same thing, more or less in some variation, is repeated with Iran. But at the same time, I have a very hard time seeing that the Russians, for instance, would do anything particularly impactful, because what is at the core of their interest is to end the war in Ukraine and find some way of making a deal. And they believe that with Trump, they have the best chance of doing so. They're not going to sacrifice that in order to assist the Iranians. Same thing with the Chinese. They have their own interests at heart, of course. And as much as they don't want to see the balkanization of Iran or that instability, they're very worried about it. It does not mean that that is a core interest of theirs at this point that would compel them to sacrifice other interests that they have. They see themselves already on a pathway towards some form of a confrontation with the United States, hopefully not a military one. Not one that they want, by the way, and they don't want to do anything that increases the risk of that either. But what would happen to Iran would be costly to the Chinese. They're getting a significant amount of their oil from Iran. Not that it's irreplaceable, but nevertheless, this will be costly. And it will be particularly costly if the United States is using this strategy to slowly but surely take control over more and more of the providers of oil to China, and by that gain a significant amount of leverage over the Chinese. Now, whether that means that Iran is the The line that the Chinese will not allow the U.S. to cross or not remains to be seen, but I very much doubt it.
Finally, and I'm grateful for your time, and I apologize in advance if this is in any way a difficult question. What can you tell us about what's going on in the UAE? There are rumors flying that the MBZ, the ruler of the UAE, has been overthrown, that he's even been killed, or that he has died, that there is internal rebellion inside the family. If any of those things are true, can you help us understand them and what might be going on?
So I have to say, George, on this one, you probably can find almost anyone who would be a better guest than me. I don't have any insight into that at all. I saw some rumors on Twitter about this, but I've not seen anything that has been confirmed. So I can't speak as to whether that is happening or not. What I can say, however, that if something of that line would happen, it would be a huge development in the region in terms that you are seeing a new constellation being formed in the region. One in which the Saudis are breaking free from the Israeli-Emirati axis, moving closer to Turkey, Egypt, and Qatar. States that increasingly view Israel as the most destabilizing and aggressive and the main threat in the region rather than seeing Iran as such. Do not see a value in that type of an Abraham Accord that the Emiratis signed. And this is also part of the reason why they have been so adamant about preventing war with Iran, not because they have much loss for the Islamic Republic, but because de facto, Iran has become a buffer between them and Israel. And if Iran is defeated or significantly weakened, or if a pro-Israeli puppet is installed in Tehran, then that would be a blow to their geopolitical security and interest in the region, in which they're trying to find some sort of a coalition in order to balance against what they see as an increasingly reckless and unhinged Israeli state allied with the UAE.
Well, Bennett was making similar points in his speech that I saw today, Naftali Bennett. He said that Egypt, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia were becoming a threat to Israel, which would have to be dealt with once the Iranians had been dealt with. That's more or less what you're saying, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, and I would also say that this is repeating what we saw happen in the early 1990s. Early 1990s, you had Iraq.
Nathan Watkins doesn't believe in limits, especially limits on your property taxes. Watkins testified against Governor Abbott's property tax caps, saying,
tax caps or revenue caps?
Nathan Watkins, he's reckless and he'll leave you in his dust.
Bookkeeping business owners make an average of $76 per hour, according to a recent
defeated by the United States and the UN coalition. The Soviet Union collapsed. What's interesting there is that those were the two factors that had brought Iran and Israel closer to each other during the time of the Shah, and even during the first decade of the Islamic Revolution, in which the Israelis actually were lobbying for Iran in Washington, D.C. I'm sure you remember the Iran-Contra scandal, in which they wanted to make sure that the U.S. sent weapons to Iran because they were more afraid of Saddam Hussein winning the war. That would be a worse situation from the Israelis. By 1991, those two factors evaporated, and suddenly the Israelis started to see Iran as the threat. And they started to talk about Islamic fundamentalism as the main threat. And they were terrified that the United States and Iran would actually rebuild their relations, and that Israel's strategic value to the United States would be lost in this new post-Cold War world. So what happened late 1991, suddenly you started to see a lot of articles in the Israeli press talking about how Iran is the new threat. We saw the same thing happen after the Turks succeeded in Syria by overthrowing Assad and supporting the HTC. Suddenly, the Israelis started to talk about how Erdogan is the most dangerous person in the Middle East. And that focus started to shift a little bit. They weren't even finished with Iran, but they started to shift it towards Turkey. So it's out there. This is not speculative. The Israelis are openly talking about it. The Arab states and Egypt and Turkey, of course, are listening to this. And as a result, they see that war with Iran is a stepping stone for the Israelis to come after them.
Well, if that doesn't concentrate their mind, I'm not sure anything would. I said finally before, but let me finally ask you, because you're so brilliant, I can hardly bear to let you go. Are there divisions inside the Trump administration on what to do about Iran? I sometimes get the feeling that Vance, for example, isn't all that keen on this course of action.
There are divisions inside the administration, and they always have been on issues of this kind. The divisions appear to look a little bit different from what they did before, however. There are others, not just Vance, that have skepticism, but this is now kept much more quiet than it was back in June. Back in June, you had more leaks about this, there were more open talk about this, and there was a much more open fight within MAGA about this issue than what you have this time around. There is a fight still, but it is much more behind the scenes than it was before for a variety of different reasons. But one thing that seems to be different, not necessarily compared to June, but that is nevertheless different, is that the president himself appears to be a driving force behind this. This is not him being pushed by a bureaucracy or by the Pentagon to go in this direction, but the president himself being on a sugar high from Venezuela, from his previous bombing campaign on Iran, as well as a lot of, in my view, misinformation being fed to him by the Israelis, who tell him that the Iranians are much weaker than others say. All you need to do is push it a little bit. You'll overthrow the regime. You will be the hero. And it seems to me that he's falling for that, whereas other elements in the administration are much more resistant to those type of narratives.
President Trump today said we could be within 10 to 15 days of a kinetic action in Iran, assuming that the negotiations don't go according to plan. But then Keir Starmer says, yeah, well, you may not be using any of our bases to get it done. We're going to see what in the world is going on here. What is up with all of this disagreement between the two of the closest allies maybe in the world? And what does this tell us about what may be coming in Iran? And try to help make sense out of some of this, we reached out to the smartest man in London, Ian Puddock, who is going to have all the answers for us today. So I'm really glad to have you on. Ian, welcome back to the show.
That's not true, by the way. You only say that because we're friends. But thank you.
Every time, and it's still always true. But I accept your non-exception. Let's jump right into this. First of all, I mean, we're going to get into some of the details about what Keir Starmer may have been, what's on his mind, and what his decision. But I mean, let's look at the fundamental of this first. For Keir Starmer to have made this statement, especially on today, when, despite whatever President Trump said just hours ago, and we're going to show that in a minute, that this could be another 10 to 15 days. Most of the military experts are saying that all the pieces will be in place where something could come as early as Saturday.
Yes.
So this close to where something's coming here. What does it tell you that the Keir Starmer is willing to tell President Trump no on possibly the eve of this?
Yeah, well, I think the secret is what you're not told and what's not being said, rather than what's actually being said in the headlines. So the headlines are very frank, very bold, very straight. We're not getting involved. You can't use our. We won't allow you to do what you want to do with using our spaces. The big thing is, though, as you will probably know, politics is all about negotiation and positions. So that's the public position. You know, we've got clean hands, white hands. We're not involved in this war at all. But that's not true. As I've posted several times in the last couple of weeks, there are British special forces on the ground in Iran, just, gathering data, information, targeting information. I've had 3 different figures from 4 different people, including a very, very senior officer, anything between 15 and 20 for British soldiers there. Obviously, you'll never hear that. You'll never see that. So the public position is clean hands. We're not involved, but there will be negotiations where we say, well, we can't do that, but what we can do, and we'll facilitate and support the Americans in other ways, if that makes sense. So we are very much involved.
And do you know, I mean, without, I guess, divulging any secrets or violating any sources, what are these special forces? Number one, what are they doing there? And number two, are they the only ones there?
The answer is the second part to that. Are they the only ones? I just don't know. Intelligence gathering. And that covers, as you will probably know better than me, being a military person, a multitude of sins. So you've got some people in a space that they shouldn't be, can't be, legally
cannot be there gathering intelligence. So it's going to be nefarious activities. So nothing good will come from it, is what I would suggest.
And what is the British intent in this? Why would they risk British lives for something that is, at least on paper, primarily between the United States and Iran, or at the worst, U.S. and Israel and Iran?
Well, we support our friends, we support our allies. There's obviously been a lot of tension with Trump and the Starmer government and David Lammy and all these people over the last six plus months. So, you know, when it really matters, you know, an MOD friend said to me in Whitehall, gosh, in 2022, about the rivalry. I am answering your question, by the way, but I've just explained.
Perfect.
He said there was real rivalry between the Royal Air Force, the Army, the Royal Navy. Obviously, the Royal Navy being the senior service, we're always seen as very elitist, but the Royal Air Force were very, very much up there, and then the Army were just the Army. But he said to me, within all this internal rivalry, when it really matters, we come together. And then he gave me lots of examples of things that operations that we've done abroad, usually in Afghanistan and in Iraq. And it's the same with our relationship with the Americans, just to answer your question directly. You know, whatever tensions, arguments, squabbles, disagreements have been there over the last 6+ months, we are now going to war. And do we support our biggest ally and friend or not? And the answer would be yes. That's the point.
But you know what? It's interesting because, Gary, if you can pull that headline back up here you had a second ago, one of the interesting things, I think that's the one in the, if I'm not mistaken, it's the one in the Telegraph. Where'd I go here? Yeah, if you could roll down there a little bit, just keep scrolling down. There's one place where it says that one of the reasons why, given for the UK statements is here, is he said that it would potentially be violating international law. If you can roll down a little bit further than that, Gary, I think it's right underneath that. Yeah, I can't find it on your screen right there. I'm sorry, but that's one of the things that they said. It could be violating international law. Well, as it turns out, if you look and see what was cited on there as the international law, it might be breaking up. It's from this Articles of Responsibility for State and International Wrongful Acts agreed to after the 9/11 attacks, actually. And the key part of that is that the rationale underlying these provisions is that the state not directly committing the wrong is nonetheless held responsible if it has knowledge of the circumstances of the act, and if the act would be, if committed by such state, an intentionally wrongful act, which, of course, attacking Iran without any kind of provocation, without any UN Security Council resolution, etc., would be a wrongful act. So according to the British government here, they say, we need to keep our hands clean. We can't be doing this. So you can't use our RAF air bases to launch some of this. Well, first of all, before I even tell people what that tangibly means, that seems to be contradicted by the fact that there may be British troops on the ground there.
Well, everything is a contradiction. There's what we see, there's what we're told, and then there's really what happens behind the scenes, and then there's the truth in amongst all this magic. And that's just how it works, I'm afraid. I don't want to digress too much, but if I can say, the British, we're really concerned about international law. It's nonsense. I mean, that's just nonsense. Some of the things that we've done in this country, and I'm not just going back into the past, some of the things that we are currently doing, it's just been revealed, for example, in Gaza, that over 2,000 British citizens have been involved in the IDF army and could be investigated for war crimes. And the Israeli government has obviously been looking at the legal aspects of that. So, there's a genocide there. I know there's people that say that's not happening. I get that. But something so serious, and we have this veneer of whiteness that, we're clean, we just wouldn't, we wouldn't violate the law. We uphold the law. It's just nonsense. It's just not true. It's just not true. As this war of aggression against Iran, I don't support Iran. I don't think they've got a particularly great government, to be honest with you, but it's not our place to be starting wars and killing lots of innocent people, which is invariably what will happen in this war.
Yeah, and then lots of other people are going to be killed as a consequence of that and their retaliation. More on that in a minute. Let's take a look at how we got here. There were 2 days ago, because this is really a strange situation. If all this was going on behind the scenes, and it was nice and smooth, then you could maybe roll your eyes and say, well, this is really bad because they're being unfaithful and untrue in public. But it's even worse than that. Let's look, first of all, here. A couple of days ago on the BBC, they reported that actually everything was fine. It was good to go, that there was an agreement between the United States on these Chagos Islands. I'm going to ask you about that in a second. But this is according to the BBC. The U.S. government has given its official backing for the UK's plan to hand over the Chagos Islands to the Mauritius in a lease back, an important military base. In a statement, the U.S. Department of State said, quote, it supports the decision of the United Kingdom to proceed with this agreement concerning the Chagos. Now, first of all, just for those who may not know, can you explain what is going on with Chagos Island? What is it the UK is going to do, and how does this lease factor in?
Well, it's been ongoing for a very long time, and we've been promising to hand it back to the indigenous people for a long time, and that time is now. Trump was initially against it, and I believe he ridiculed it a couple of times about, why are we doing that? But we are, and it's happening. And obviously, again, we're back to politics. It's gone from a position of ridiculing the British government for handing it back to the indigenous people to now supporting it. Politics, where it's like slime. It just moves and morphs into whatever the feeling of the day is.
Is it just, though, on paper that it's going to be, quote, handed back over to the indigenous people? Because apparently there's a 99-year lease that's going to go along with it, which, correct me if I'm wrong, doesn't really change the practical application on the ground. Is that right?
That's correct. And we will still have our military there, and we will still have a big say in what goes on in terms of the local politics. So we are stepping away over 100 years, and obviously that's a long time in politics. So a lot can happen. But I do think it will happen. I mean, I believe. So I'll rephrase that. I don't know what's going to happen in 100 years, so I can't say that. I do believe there is a genuine intent to hand that back. I do actually believe that.
But again, as you say, that we'll all long be dead before that ever comes up. So no one can say exactly. But the bottom line is that right now it won't have any practical operational impact at all. It's just something that's on paper and some promise to somebody else who is not probably even born yet. That was 2 days ago. Yesterday, Deutsche Welle reported, however, that the U.S. has changed its mind. Trump flips on his position. Prime Minister Starmer, according to Trump, should not lose control for any reason of Diego Garcia, which is a part of the Chagos Islands, by entering a tenuous, at best, 100-year lease, Trump asked it, saying that it would be a blight on our great allies. So if this is a public policy dance, why in the world would the United States, I might be asking you a question you can answer here, but why would the U.S. say yes, the State Department officially that it supports the UK government position on one day, and then the next day, Trump turn around and say, yeah, that's a dumb thing?
You're right. I can't answer
coordinated
that.
with the UK. That better question.
Yeah. I mean, I really can't answer that. Other than they are negotiating positions. And normally when people have negotiating positions, the negotiating positions are in if you and I are negotiating over something, whatever that something might be, you and I will negotiate in private. We don't make public statements until we get closer to the negotiation, if it was going to be a public thing. But obviously with all the things that go on, and Trump just speaks his mind and shouts stuff out without sometimes thinking. You just don't know what side of the bed he got out on in the morning sometimes with Trump, I think.
True enough. And let's look at some of the practical implications. If that issue with the Chagos Island wouldn't actually change anything materially, Keir Starmer's comments today could, though. Here's a combination of what President Trump said on his Truth Social, which is getting a lot of energy now. And I want to point out here that highlighted part, especially at the beginning. He said, should Iran decide not to make a deal, it may be necessary for the United States to use Diego Garcia and the airfield located at Fairford in order to eradicate a potential attack by a highly unstable and dangerous regime. That's where RAF Fairford is, right there. It's on the left side of London on this map right here. But apparently that's what, according to Trump, is something we would need if we're going to operate, especially a sustained operation, a campaign against Iran. But so here's the question. If London is really working with Washington here, especially Starmer and Trump, and this weird behind the scenes doing things with special operations on the ground right now, why would they deny an actual operational in substantial change, because that would be a stop. If we can't use any RAF bases in this, and I understand actually Diego Garcia, apparently that would not apply. We would still be able to use Diego Garcia, as I have discovered a minute ago, but not being able to use some of the RAF bases, isn't that a damned if you do, damned if you don't, or a situation where I'm helping you with one hand and hurting you with the other from the UK side?
Well, they're hypocrites, aren't they? So, as I said, this white veneer of, we can't do it international law, we can't support this, all this kind of nonsense. The reality is we are very much going to be part of this, helping the Americans any way that we can, but we create the veneer of whiter than white that you can't go and bomb from our bases. And we will be doing everything other than have those bases to support the Americans in whatever they're going to do. And the decision, I've heard this from a major general, the decision has absolutely been made. And no one has told me this. No one has told me this. But it's been alluded to in a conversation, but no one has said these specific words, that they will use a nuke on a military establishment, a military base or something like that, and just say there's more coming unless you do what we say, unless you negotiate with us. And I just believe these people are crazy enough to actually do that, to believe.
When you say these people, which these people are you talking about? Who would you?
I'm talking about the Americans. I'm talking about the Americans and the Israelis, to say that, there's more of this coming, unless I don't believe they're going to bomb Tehran and all this kind of stuff with nukes or anything like that. I don't believe that for one moment. But I believe that they will hit a military base big time and just say there's more coming.
And did whether this was an alluded to situation or not, I mean, what was the rationale behind that? Because according to all this combat power we've got in the region, which is a profound amount, we've not had this much power since the 2003 war against Iraq. It's that long since this much air and sea power have been assembled in one place. Obviously the ground components is absent from this. But if we have that much air power, missile power, why would anyone even be thinking about resorting to nuclear weapons?
When you say this much power, what does that exactly mean? So there's a lot of kit there. There's a lot of technology. There's a lot of hardware. But how long can America sustain an attack? It's actually not that long. Iran doesn't have to beat America. It doesn't have to blow up all the ships or sink the ships or hit the ships. All Iran has to do is outlast the Americans, which it's very, very capable of doing with its hypersonic missiles. And I don't know if this is true or not. I don't know if they're getting any help from the Chinese or the Russians. You read about that, you see things, but if that's true, the American military will absolutely know that for sure. If that is true. But I just think that Iran can fight back, and they can fight back or hit back hard. So all they have to do is outlast the Americans. And the Americans, how long can they last with all their military power there? With 2 weeks?
Yeah. 2 weeks? I think most of my assessment is that we could for 2 weeks have an almost nonstop kind of big strike, etc. But we could maintain it for a long time. We have I think like 150 C-17, C-5 transport ships, transport planes that we could continue ferrying back and forth missiles to keep things going, and especially missiles for air power. The ships could go back and reload if they need to. Diego Garcia, some other places like that, depending on if they get hit or not, but they have that.
That's the point.
So we could just drag this on for a long time, but maybe the bigger question, though, is not how long can we get missiles, but how many missiles do we have? Because I could see a situation where if Iran does what you suggested, just outlast us and doesn't give in, that it's either that or you're going to lose,
or use nukes.
That would whoever saying that is one thing, but I got to say that the political decision in Washington for us to use one would just be off the charts, and I can't imagine Russia and China being okay with that. I think
of course not. No, of course
let's hope that wouldn't be the case. But then again, I would have hoped that just 2-3 months ago that we would never just outright attack to destroy another country with no justification either, and yet here we are on the brink. So how can I eliminate that as a possibility? Is it radical and crazy as it sounds? I can't eliminate it.
No, you can't. You can't. Obviously, don't agree with it by raising. I'm not supporting that, agreeing with that at all under any circumstances. But
Ian, let me share with you one other thing here, because I know we're running a little bit short on time. But in the category of doing things that don't make any sense at all, there was, and I don't have this soundbite in front of me here at the moment, but about 10 or so days ago, Secretary of State Marco Rubio was giving some testimony before the Senate, ostensibly on the Venezuela operation, et cetera. And one of the senators there said, okay, about this Iran thing, though, if we have a regime change operation and we succeed and we get rid of the regime, what is the plan afterwards? And Marco Rubio, in front of God and country, said, I don't know. We don't have one. We don't really know. I mean, that's just not something we're thinking about. Okay. That was the Secretary of State. It got a little more outrageous yesterday when Lindsey Graham said this.
Does the U.S. have a favored candidate? Are we talking about Reza Pahlavi? Because he's around quite a bit.
Yeah, I like him, fine, but it's up to the Iranian people. Don't get ahead of yourself. The day after the regime falls will be complicated.
We don't do day after well in the U.S.
That's what you got to quit saying. We, it's not we, it's them. It's not my job to construct a new Iran. It's my job to give them the opportunity to construct a new Iran.
That is just absolutely. You said it was outrageous what the Secretary of State said, but for Lindsey Graham, a sitting U.S. senator, to be saying on camera, "I don't care, man. That's their deal. All we're going to do is kill everybody. It's up to you, whatever happens next," which sounds to me like all they really want to do. And I've heard this from other folks too. And I wonder if you have heard any of this from your side of the pond there, that the actual objective is not regime change per se, but it's just regime destruction.
Yeah, create a mess. Create a mess, absolutely. Create a mess. It's a divided people are always easier to manage or to organize. And if you can create confusion and mess and destruction, and no one knows who's in charge and who's responsible for making things happen, and things aren't working and things are broken, everyone's going to be concentrating on that, and that gives the people, these masters of the universe who make all these crazy decisions, an opportunity to do whatever they want. It's just, it is insanity. But these people exist. I mean, it is insane. It is insane.
Everything that we see with all that combat power around turns into something here. I mean, how is Britain going to handle this? Because you can't keep it hidden forever what these things are going on there. And if we don't let us, use the RAF bases, whatever, and things continue to go bad, will the UK ever finally say, especially if it starts getting really ugly, and if anybody's talking about, these kinds of issues with the nuclear weapons being used, for example, I'd still hope that that's just a radical claim that's not in truth. But whatever the government at UK may be doing, what about the people in Great Britain? I mean, are they going to be okay with this kind of stuff?
Well, it's like anything. It's all about information control, which is what I was saying at the sort of the outset of our discussion. Just with Gaza, 2,000 Britons have been fighting for the IDF. Most people just simply don't know that. They would be appalled if they knew that, but they just don't. It's not in the mainstream. You won't see that on the BBC or Sky News or any of the big channels. So it is information control, and whatever we're up to in Iran, will that come out at some point? It always does. It just does. It's just human nature. People like to talk, but as it stands at the moment, I mean, I know lots of people that support the war. A good friend of mine said to me, a personal friend of mine said they've killed. This is the Iranian government. They've killed 80,000 protesters, was just machine gunning all these people, and based on absolutely nothing. Based on nothing. Are they killing people? The answer is yes.
By their own accounts, they said yes, about 3,000 something. But they have provided a by name description of who has fallen, to include their police folks. So apparently they are very transparent about who's died. But I have not seen any concurrent claim about those who said, I hadn't seen 80, but I've seen 30. That's used routinely here on American television. with no evidence itself, but it just builds up a lot of anger and hatred toward the government because it's accepted as true, I guess.
Of course, you know, if that was happening in North Korea, would we go and if Kim Il Jong was killing 3,000, 5,000, 30,000, or 50,000, 80,000 people of his own civilians, would be invading there? No, it's got nukes, so we wouldn't do it. So in all this, you know, righteous anger that we have to defend and go in and help is on the way, we would, you know, that help is on the way is only for certain people. It's not for mankind per se.
Yeah, but you and me both know it's not about helping anybody. It's all about creating destruction for the case of Benjamin Netanyahu and nobody else. This is not an American national interest. It's not in British national interest.
Absolutely
definitely not. It's not in the regional's national interest at all, except for one state. And that's just a fact. And I don't care if anybody likes it or accepts it. It is a fact. And
it's just a fact.
It is. And until we start
an indisputable fact. An indisputable fact.
It is. It's not hard to figure out here. It's not hidden.
No.
Well, listen, I'm afraid we got to keep it short here today because I've got to go on another LBC.
Kofi, follow me.